Welcome back to Dreamland Encounters. I share real-life stories about otherworldly experiences that might help you relax and drift off to sleep. Before we start, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. The night was that strange in-between time when neighborhood lights dim and silence creeps in. I'd just finished cleaning the kitchen and decided to take Max, my shepherd mix, for a final walk. He was antsy, pacing near the door with his nails tapping an urgent rhythm on the tile. August's muggy heat still radiated from the ground, though a cooler breeze offered some relief. Instead of our usual sidewalk route, I cut across the open field behind the elementary school. It wasn't large, just 2 soccer pitches of grass with trees marking the far boundary. Something about the space felt different. No cars, no porch lights, no motion sensors, just cricket songs and Max's leash pulling me forward. Everything seemed normal at first. Max sniffed around, circling as dogs do, while I stood watching the night. Stars shone unusually bright in the low humidity. The Big Dipper stood out clearly, and a couple of planes tracked steadily across the sky. Halfway across the field, the sound caught my attention. It wasn't loud, but a vibration that resonated deep in my chest before reaching my ears. A smooth, even hum that seemed to descend from above, without a clear source. I initially thought it might be a distant generator or air conditioner, but the pitch was too consistent, like a massive tuning fork suspended in the air. Max suddenly stopped mid-step. His body went rigid, head lowered, tail stiff. When I tugged the leash, he remained rooted to the ground. His ears pinned back and he released a serious growl, not his playful sound, but the warning type he used when someone approached our yard at night. Low, steady, threatening. The sound continued, and I slowly turned. Max and I were standing in the field when the sound first hit. It filled the space around us, a constant hum that seemed to press down from everywhere and nowhere. I scanned the sky, expecting to see a plane, but only stars dotted the darkness. No movement, no blinking lights, just that persistent sound. Max was rigid beside me, growling deep in his throat. His body trembled against the leash, and when I put my hand on his collar to calm him, he wouldn't stop staring upward. Not at anything specific, but as if the entire sky had captured his attention. The crickets had vanished, creating an unsettling silence that made the field feel empty and lifeless. Crouched there, my hand unconsciously tightening on Max's collar, I realized the hum remained perfectly consistent. No rise, no fall, just an unchanging pitch that made time feel suspended. Minutes might have passed, or perhaps just seconds. Max's growl shifted to short, sharp barks. He lunged forward, then stopped, and lunged again, warning something invisible. Something kept me rooted to the spot. The air felt thick, charged with an inexplicable tension. Then, abruptly, the sound stopped. Not faded, not drifted away, but vanished instantly. The silence that followed was profound, the kind that makes your ears ring and feels overwhelming. Max remained alert, ears back, body rigid. He paced in tight circles, sniffing the air intensely, his hackles still raised. I stood waiting, expecting something to reveal itself. Nothing did. The stars remained unchanged, the trees at the field's edge motionless, the distant houses quiet. Gradually, the crickets returned, first hesitant, then building to their normal volume. Max's tension slowly dissolved, his tail lowered, though he continued casting occasional glances skyward. He pulled at the leash, clearly eager to leave. We walked back toward the sidewalk, Max practically dragging me. Under the streetlights, everything felt almost normal again. Porch lights glowed softly, and a car rolled past, restoring a sense of everyday routine. The night shift at a distribution warehouse just outside of Toledo was cold and clear. January air stung my nose, making every sound feel sharper. The building wasn't huge, 2 long aisles stacked with pallets, a loading dock on one end and an office up front, but at night it always felt bigger than its actual size. My job mostly involved walking laps inside and around the perimeter, checking doors and monitoring cameras. By 2 o'clock in the morning, I'd already completed 2 full rounds and was midway through another walk across the main floor. My flashlight was more for comfort than necessity, as motion sensors kept the place dimly lit. That's when it happened. Between the shelves, the floor in front of me suddenly lit up. Not a subtle flicker from the overheads, but blindingly bright, so intense that I froze mid-step. A wide band of light swept across the concrete, moving smoothly as if a massive spotlight had passed overhead. The shelving unit's shadows stretched long and sharp-edged, suggesting the light source was directly above the roof. I looked up. The warehouse lights remained unchanged. Fluorescents hummed their usual drone. Nothing seemed brighter than before. Yet the glow on the floor was undeniably real. It slid forward past me toward the loading dock and then vanished. Standing there, heart racing, I listened for any sound, an engine, rotor blades, anything. Silence answered back. I stepped out into the freezing night, the big overhead dock door rattling open behind me. The lot was deserted, utterly silent. Stars peppered the perfectly clear sky, a thin moon hanging low on the horizon. No planes, no trucks, not even a distant highway rumble broke the stillness. I stood there, breath clouding in front of me, waiting for some sound, anything, to explain the strange moment. Nothing came. About half an hour earlier, I'd been walking my usual security route when a sudden light swept through the warehouse. At first, I'd shone my flashlight on the concrete floor, hoping for an explanation. Now, back in the security office, I was rewinding the camera footage, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The cameras had caught it. Not a clean spotlight, but a glow that spread across the entire floor. It was brightest in one spot, then expanded, warping the shadows of the shelves as if something was moving directly overhead. Then, just like I'd witnessed in person, it vanished. No gradual fade. One frame was lit, the next completely dark. Leaning closer, I searched for any rational explanation. Dust, a reflection, a feed glitch, but the glow had substance. I could see how it bent around corners, how it reflected off the shrink-wrapped pallets. This wasn't digital noise. Something else caught my eye. Just before the light appeared, the north wall's outdoor camera had flickered with a tiny static ripple. When the glow filled the warehouse, that feed went black for exactly 3 seconds before returning to normal. Grabbing my coat and flashlight, I went out to investigate. The north side was nothing but gravel, a chain-link fence, and beyond that, a patch of winter bare woods. I swept my beam across the tree line. Branches swayed slightly in the breeze, but nothing seemed out of place. Back inside, everything looked normal. Pallets stacked neatly, forklifts parked against the wall, yet my skin still prickled with an unexplained static tension. The warehouse night shift was uneventful until that moment. A silence hung heavy, different from the usual background noise of distant dogs or highway traffic. It felt sealed off, isolated. I retreated inside, locked the door, and settled into the office, watching the monitors. The rest of the shift was tense, waiting for something, another sweep of light, a sound, anything, but nothing happened. The warehouse remained perfectly normal. By morning, I was so wired that I barely spoke to the incoming shift. At home, I collapsed into bed, repeatedly playing that strange moment in my mind. Shadows stretching across the floor, a bright, sourceless light washing silently over everything. The memory remains crystal clear. It happened late in the summer when Carla and I took her uncle's boat out on the lake in northern Minnesota, close to the Canadian border. We'd been at the cabin for a week, filling our days with fishing, swimming, and drinking cheap beer on the dock. That night was different. The lake was unnaturally calm, with a glassy stillness that only happens on windless nights when the air feels thick and heavy. The moon was new, creating an almost pitch-black landscape. We decided to drift, hoping to stargaze and catch some meteors. Carla loved being on the water more than I did. I get nervous in complete darkness, but she was determined to go out. We packed a small cooler, a blanket, and a cheap lantern we never used, wanting to keep our eyes adjusted to the darkness. Around midnight, we were a few hundred yards offshore. No other boats were visible, and the lakeside cabins had gone quiet except for a distant porch light. Initially, everything seemed normal. We lay on the bench seats, pointing out constellations across the clearly visible Milky Way. Occasionally, a loon's weird, echoing call would drift across the water. The air was cool enough to see our breath when we exhaled forcefully. I'm not sure when it began, but at some point, I noticed the water wasn't as dark as it should have been. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks, like when you stare at black water too long and start imagining shapes. But this was different. It was more like a faint glow just beneath the surface. The glow caught my eye first, maybe 20 or 30 feet off the starboard side. Carla spotted it too, asking if I'd dropped the lantern overboard. But this was different. The water seemed lit from underneath, steady and circular, about the size of a pickup truck bed. We watched, frozen, unsure what we were seeing. Then the surface broke. What emerged wasn't a typical lake phenomenon. At first, I thought it might be a gas bubble rising from the depths, but it kept rising, defying expectations. A sphere emerged, glowing faintly white, almost like frosted glass, with an internal light, completely silent. No splashing, no sound. It hovered about 10 feet above the water, dripping in sheets but not touching the surface. The boat's metal railing gleamed, and perfect ripple circles spread out around it. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Phosphorescence? A weather balloon? Reflected headlights? Nothing made sense. Carla gripped my arm so tightly, her nails dug into my skin. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I heard nothing, but she insisted there was a low hum, a vibration in her chest. Maybe I felt something too, so faint I couldn't distinguish between real sensation and imagination. The sphere hung there, suspended for what seemed like an eternity. We were paralyzed, afraid even the slightest movement might disrupt this inexplicable moment. Then, without warning, it shot straight up. No gradual acceleration, no arc, just instant movement from stationary to vanished. 1 second, it was over the water. The next, a pinpoint of light racing into the sky, blending with the stars. Absolute silence followed. No loons, no insects, nothing. The lake returned to its flat, black state. The ripples faded. Carla's hand left my arm, and I noticed my sleeve was damp from her sweat. We sat in stunned silence for another 10 minutes. Every small sound, a fish splashing, the boat knocking against waves, made us jump. Finally, I started the motor and steered us back, the memory of that impossible moment hanging between us. The night was crisp and cloudless, an unusual September evening in northern Wisconsin. I'd left the diner later than planned, around 11:30 p.m., with empty roads stretching before me like thin asphalt ribbons through cornfields and woods. On my bike, headlights cutting narrow paths through darkness, I breathed in the wet earth smell left behind by earlier rain. At first, everything felt completely normal. I was pedaling along County Road F, listening to tires on asphalt and distant cricket sounds. My mind wandered through typical worries, unpaid bills, a recent argument with my roommate, the mundane thoughts that drift through your head when you're tired. Then I noticed the moon. It wasn't harsh or blinding, but soft and pale. Something was different. Not a typical lunar phase, but something stranger. The moon looked physically split into two distinct shapes. This memory connects to another night, years earlier, out on a lake with Carla. We'd seen something that defied explanation, a smooth, silent sphere rising from the water, as if it had been waiting beneath the surface. When we returned to her uncle's dock that night, everything felt off. We tied up the boat and went inside without a word. Her uncle's dog, usually loud and reactive, sat quietly in the corner with ears pressed back, staring at the floor. Carla drank some whiskey and went to bed without discussing what we'd witnessed. I spent that night trying to process what we'd seen, sitting alone in the dark living room. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that impossible sphere emerging from the water. We never mentioned it to our uncle. We just acted tired, like we'd simply stayed out late. I considered asking around about strange sightings, but couldn't figure out how without seeming crazy. A year later, Carla and I broke up, unrelated reasons. But the last time we spoke, she brought up that night. She asked if I remembered. I said I did. Of course I did. She grew quiet, uncertain whether we'd actually seen something, or if she'd somehow dreamed it. I haven't returned to that lake since. The moon looked strange that night. 2 of them hung in the sky, one solid and familiar, the other a faint, blurry outline just east of the first. I braked, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Could it be condensation on my glasses or lingering fog near the cornfields? Stopping on the roadside, I balanced with 1 foot down. The moons remained motionless, eerily still. The second moon wasn't a perfect copy. It appeared thinner, more like a curved light hovering than a solid object. Blinking and rubbing my eyes changed nothing. Gradually, the faint moon began to drift, not with the speed of a plane or satellite, but slowly, steadily across the horizon. I watched it move past the tree silhouettes, then fade softly, not disappearing suddenly, but simply thinning until it vanished. The original moon stayed untouched. Uneasy, I pedaled faster, my hands feeling sticky despite the cool air. I kept glancing upward, half expecting the strange sight to repeat. Nothing happened. Near the creek bridge, I noticed something else odd. The usual nighttime sounds were completely absent. No crickets, no frogs, not even a leaf rustling. The world seemed paused, holding its breath. No wind, no water, just the faint hum of bike tires on wet asphalt. Then I saw the shadows. They flickered and moved independently along the roadside, stretching across fields in impossible ways. Long, thin shapes that didn't respond when I moved my head. They shifted subtly, almost as if alive. I tried rationalizing fog, settling, moon reflections on wet corn stalks, but my explanations felt weak. My stomach tightened, my chest felt heavy. I pedaled harder, headlight beams skimming the ground, catching cornfield edges. Each hint of movement in the shadows made my pulse jump. A faint, high-pitched tone began, not music, not mechanical, just a soft, drawn-out hum that seemed to vibrate through the silent night. The lake was quiet and misty at dawn, a time I always prefer for fishing. My name's Carl, and I live on the outskirts of Prescott, Idaho. I was up early that morning, around 4:30, with the air thick with the scent of wet earth and pine. During the ride home that night, something felt off. A strange tone hovered just above the tree line, moving slightly with the road's contour. It was distant and hard to pinpoint. When I looked up, only the moon and stars were visible. The sound lingered for about a minute before vanishing as suddenly as it appeared. I tried to convince myself I was overtired, imagining things because of the darkness and isolation. But the split moon and drifting shadow shapes had been real. I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept glancing over my shoulder and scanning the sky, occasionally catching a thin glow at the edge of my vision. Yet whenever I tried to focus, it would disappear. The world felt subtly wrong, not threatening, just inexplicably different. By the time I reached my driveway, normal nighttime sounds had returned. Crickets chirped, distant birds called, and the fields felt alive again. Shadows moved as they should, and the sky held only the familiar moon. I locked my bike in the garage, hands still trembling slightly. Inside, I made tea and kept watching the window, hoping for a hint of that strange light or hum. Nothing came. The next morning was clear and fresh, with dew-laden air. Over coffee, I told my roommate about the experience. He laughed, suggesting it might have been airplane lights. But I knew what I'd seen or thought I'd seen. Since then, I've biked that route dozens of times, always at night, always on the same stretch. No split moon, no drifting lights, no sudden silence. Yet sometimes, when the wind is still and the air feels heavy in a particular way, I catch a faint glow at the corner of my eye. My stomach tightens ever so slightly, a reminder of that strange night. Every morning before work, I head to the dock with 2 fishing rods and a thermos of coffee. I park my truck, settle in, and let the quiet morning wash over me. But this morning felt different from the start. The fog was unusually heavy, clinging to my jacket and dripping from my hat's brim. I cast my line and listened to the soft water sounds, the gentle slap against the dock, a distant fish jumping. At first, everything seemed normal. Then I noticed something strange. The water's surface was reflecting dawn's dim light in an odd, unnatural way. 3 small, bright lights moved across the ripples with an unsettling precision. They glided smoothly, not following any wind or current I could detect. I squinted and looked up. The sky was a pale, overcast gray, with dawn's light struggling through. No planes, no birds, no other lights were visible. I tried to rationalize what I was seeing, thinking maybe my eyes were adjusting to the mist. But the lights continued moving, evenly spaced, traveling in a deliberate formation. Walking to the dock's edge, I tracked their movement. It was slow enough that I could follow their path easily. I scanned the tree line, expecting to see someone with a lantern or a hidden boat. Nothing was there, just fog lake and the faint hum of morning insects beginning to stir. Sitting back down, I searched for logical explanations. Perhaps the mist was creating a reflection from the trees, or my truck lights. My truck was off, and the dock had only one dim, forgotten bulb. These lights didn't behave like normal reflections. They moved with an unnatural precision, a straight, steady drift across the water's surface. Minutes passed. My coffee grew cold, forgotten. Every instinct told me something was wrong, but I couldn't look away. I considered various explanations. Distant boat lights, sunrise reflections, an optical illusion caused by the fog. Nothing made sense. Then the most unsettling moment occurred. One light paused briefly, then drifted slightly ahead, as if it was aware of my observation. It quickly rejoined the other 2. My pulse quickened. Something was definitely not right. I was alone on the dock that morning, more aware of my isolation than ever. No cars, no other fishermen, not even a bird in sight. The stillness surrounded me. Time seemed to stretch as I watched the reflections moving slowly across the water. The wooden boards creaked beneath me, and the gentle lapping of water created a rhythmic backdrop to the silence. I eventually stood, stretching my stiff legs, but the strange lights remained. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a small flashlight from my tackle box and waved it over the water, hoping to understand what was causing these mysterious reflections. When the light touched the surface, something peculiar happened. The reflections rippled slightly, almost as if acknowledging the movement. Then, suddenly, They vanished. No flash, no dramatic disappearance, just gone. I sat back down, breathing heavily, trying to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. The surrounding environment felt completely normal. Misty morning air, birds beginning their daily chorus, occasional splashes from fish waking up. Yet those three lights had completely disappeared. I scanned the horizon, expecting some sign, some continuation of the strange occurrence. Nothing. My hands trembled slightly as I packed up my gear, continually glancing over my shoulder. During the drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those reflections hovering in the early light. When I told Linda about the experience, she listened patiently. I could tell she thought I was overreacting, perhaps attributing too much significance to morning fog. I tried convincing myself it was just a trick of light, a result of being half asleep in the dawn's grey light. But the feeling persisted. For weeks afterward, I avoided early morning fishing. I took different routes to work and found myself constantly scanning the sky when driving past the lake. Occasionally I'd catch what seemed like a faint glimmer on the water, just for a second, enough to make me slow down and wonder. I've been back to the lake a couple times since that morning when the water was foggy and still. Each time, nothing appeared. Just the same grey water, the same trees, the same calm morning noises. But that dawn stays with me, the memory of three lights moving together across the water's surface. I can't explain what I saw. It might have been reflections, tricks of the fog, or my imagination stretched thin by the quiet isolation. Yet part of me remembers it as something real, more solid than anything else that morning. I tried to convince myself it was a mistake, a brief anomaly in the lake's calm. But even now, before sunrise, I find myself glancing toward the water, half hoping I won't see it again, half hoping I might. The night started ordinarily enough. I left my friend's place around 10:45 p.m., heading home on the quiet back roads of northern Vermont. Once past the last streetlights, it was just fields and woods, black and still. My bike lights cut narrow paths through the darkness, and the air carried the dampness of an earlier drizzle. At first, everything felt normal. I pedaled along Route 128, the rhythm of tire hum mixing with an owl's distant hoot and a far-off dog's bark. My mind drifted to work, to forgotten laundry, typical evening thoughts. Then something changed. The moon caught my attention. I've always loved watching the sky while night cycling. One of the few times I feel truly alone and calm, but this was different. The moon seemed to have split in two. Not a cloud or a phase, but two distinct shapes. One looked familiar, the soft yellow-white glow I expected. The other was fainter, blurred, like a ghostly tracing beside the first. I slowed, gripping the handlebars tightly. Exhaustion, foggy glasses, but blinking and rubbing my eyes changed nothing. On the gravel shoulder, I stopped completely. The faint moon hung motionless while the real one remained in place. Then it began to move, so slowly it was almost imperceptible. It drifted east, sliding past the tree line. Beyond the edge of a cornfield, everything else remained perfectly still. No wind, no clouds, just movement. The moon split into two, its second version fading softly without any sudden disappearance. Just a gradual thinning until only the original moon remained. My hands grew sticky and clammy as I got back on the bike, trying to understand what I'd just seen. A mile down the road, near the creek bridge, something felt off. The night sounds vanished completely. No crickets, no frogs, no rustling leaves. This wasn't just a momentary quiet. Everything seemed paused. I stopped, one foot on the ground, listening to absolute silence. The air felt heavy and still. Shadows stretched across the fields at impossible angles, moving in ways that defied logic. They shifted subtly, independent of trees or crops. I squinted, wanting to believe it was a trick of dim light, but these shadows followed their own rules. My bike's front light swept the roadside as I pedaled faster, my pulse jumping with each hint of movement. Then came a sound, a faint, high-pitched hum, not mechanical, not musical, just a soft vibration hanging in the air like a distant held note. I froze, trying to determine its source. Was it my imagination, my racing heart? The hum drifted overhead along the road, clear and precise. I looked up. Stars, the steady moon, nothing unusual. Suddenly, the hum vanished, leaving behind the quiet night. I shook my head, attempting to rationalize the experience as a product of isolation and fatigue, but I knew what I'd witnessed. A split moon, drifting light, unnatural silence, and shadows that moved with their own intent. The rest of the ride home was a blur of constant glancing and heightened awareness. A faint glow flickered at the edge of my vision, always just out of focus. Each time I turned to look, it disappeared. My stomach tightened with the unsettling feeling that I'd glimpsed something never meant to be seen. By the time I reached my driveway, normal night sounds had returned. Crickets chirped, restoring a sense of familiar comfort, but the memory of that strange moment lingered, a subtle disruption in the fabric of reality. The trip started like any other solo camping journey. I'm Ethan, and I usually head out alone to find some quiet before work consumes me. That evening, I arrived at Cedar Hollow around 9, setting up camp on a small ridge with a decent valley view. The wind had died down, leaving the air crisp and still perfect for starting a fire. I stacked some wood and built a small fire near a rock outcrop. By midnight, the flames had settled into glowing embers. With my headlamp on, I was reading an old trail guide, everything feeling almost too quiet. You know that silence where you can hear leaves shifting even when there's no breeze. I must have dozed off. When I woke, I blinked at my wristwatch. 3:14 a.m. I knew I'd checked the time before sleeping. It was around 1 a.m. just moments ago. The numbers glowed brightly against the dark watch face. Groggy, I reached for the fire. It was still alive, crackling gently with smoke curling into the cold night. I could have sworn I'd left it burning low just 20 minutes earlier. 2 hours had passed according to the watch, but the fire looked unchanged. Something felt off. Later, months after that night, I told a friend about the experience. She laughed, suggesting I was tired or imagining things. Maybe she was right. But now, when I bike that same stretch, I sometimes catch a flicker at the edge of my vision, a faint shimmer that doesn't quite belong. It vanishes before I can focus, yet it's enough to make me grip the handlebars tighter and pedal a bit faster, half hoping it won't follow. The sky looks ordinary again, with chirping and rustling leaves. But in the still moments, I can still feel that faint weight of drifting light at the corner of my eye. The ridge was eerily silent as I stepped outside the tent. Normally, Cedar Hollow would buzz with nighttime sounds, an owl's call, a distant fox, but tonight, nothing stirred. Not even a leaf rustled. My boots crunched over frost-covered ground as I circled the dying fire, and an unsettling stillness pressed against my ears. Something felt off. I glanced at my watch before bed, and the time didn't seem right. Trying to rationalize my unease, I poured water into a tin cup, hoping its warmth would settle my nerves. That's when I saw it. A faint pale glow crossed the tree line. It wasn't like moonlight, though the moon hung bright and clear in a cloudless sky. The glow moved with an unnatural fluidity, almost gliding against an invisible current. When I squinted, it seemed to retreat and then reappear further along the trees. My stomach tightened. I scanned the valley, searching for an explanation. No distant road could account for this light, and there was no accompanying sound. Just that strange, deliberate movement. An animal reflection. The motion was too smooth, too intentional. Retreating to the tent, I felt a slight tremor in my hands. The fire crackled, its embers unchanged. My watch read 3:18 a.m. Only 4 minutes had passed. The glow now hung motionless over a cluster of pines as if watching. A sudden wind rustled the tent fabric. Then, abruptly, silence. The usual nighttime sounds vanished. No crickets, no small animals, no creak of distant trees. Complete quiet, heavier than before. I realized I'd been holding my breath. Carefully, I unzipped the tent flap and peered out. The glow had disappeared. The forest looked normal, frost glittering under moonlight. When I blinked, the fire seemed unnaturally bright, as if I'd never left. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Sitting against my sleeping bag, I fixated on the watch. 3:19 a.m., I counted out loud, desperate for something solid to hold on to. Each blink came with an expectation, a hope, really, that the strange glow might reappear. But nothing ever did. Sleep eluded me. Whenever I started to drift, something barely perceptible brushed against my awareness, a whisper of movement just beyond the firelight. Shadows seemed to shift among the trees, but when I tried to focus, they vanished. The forest was unnaturally silent. No animal sounds. No wind, just my own breathing and the crackling fire. Dawn finally broke, spreading light across the valley. Frost covered every branch. The landscape looked completely ordinary. No unusual shapes, no out-of-place shadows, no mysterious glow. The fire had burned down to ashes. I packed up slowly, half expecting some final anomaly to appear. Nothing did. During the drive home, I constantly checked my watch against the dashboard clock. Everything synchronized perfectly now, but the memory of that night left me unsettled. I tried reasoning with myself, a glitch, a dream, a trick of the mind, but nothing calmed the lingering unease. At home, the watch ticked normally on the counter, yet in still nights, when everything is quiet, I can still feel something strange, a subtle bending of time. Sometimes I half expect to see that pale glow drifting silently through trees again. Months later, I still can't explain the 2-hour jump. I can't explain the fire that kept burning. I can't explain the silence. But what haunts me most is the feeling that the forest was aware, that it had deliberately waited while time skipped, then deliberately released me. My name is Marcus. I've been a train conductor for nearly 15 years, and I thought I'd seen everything on these tracks. That night changed everything. The weather had turned cold overnight, frost clung to the rails and sleepers, and the wind had dropped, making the air feel heavy and thick. I was alone in the cab for most of the route. The engineer, Dave, had gone to the mess car for a break, leaving me to monitor the gauges and tracks. Darkness surrounded me, pitch black, with only the faintest hint of light. The night train rolled through the frost-covered landscape, its quiet rhythm broken only by the wheels on the rails. I was on duty, surrounded by the soft glow of console lights. Everything felt calm and predictable until something caught my eye. A bright flicker just outside the window. At first I thought I was imagining it, but the light was real, moving with an impossible speed alongside the train. It matched every movement precisely, staying perfectly level with the train cars, as if connected by an invisible tether. When Dave returned to the cab, I called out, trying to keep my voice steady despite my churning stomach. "You seeing this?" I asked. Dave looked where I pointed and shook his head. "Marcus, it's dark. Nothing out there but trees." But I knew what I saw, a pure white, steady glow that moved with clear purpose. No engine noise, no discernible shape, just this light darting alongside us. During a brief stop, I walked through the passenger cars. Everyone seemed tired, some half asleep. A couple argued about the train's delay. When I asked if anyone else had seen the light, I was met with blank stares. "What light?" they asked. "You dreaming again, Marcus?" For nearly 10 miles, the light followed us. Sometimes it would flick ahead of a curve, sometimes lag behind, but never vanishing, never slowing. I tried to think logically. How could something move this fast? The tracks cut through dense woods too tight for an aircraft, and yet this light moved with an eerie, silent precision. I returned to the cab and told Dave I couldn't make sense of it. He just muttered, "Keep your eyes on the tracks." But I couldn't stop watching. The light seemed to hover near the ground at one point, then dart back to its original position, always maintaining its mysterious, unbroken pursuit. As a conductor with decades of experience, I know these tracks like the back of my hand. But that night was different. A strange light appeared beside the train, moving alongside a frost-covered creek parallel to the tracks. For the first time in years, my hands trembled on the throttle. The light's behavior was impossible to explain. It slowed slightly, then shot straight up into the dark sky without warning. In an instant, it vanished completely. No flare, no after-image, just the empty tree line, as if nothing had ever been there. Back in the sleeper car, I asked the passengers if they'd noticed anything unusual. Their polite responses only increased my unease. No one had seen it, not the engineer, not a single passenger. This made me feel singled out, like I was experiencing something entirely personal. The ride home was heavy with silence. I kept scanning the side of the train, half expecting the bright white pulse to reappear between the passing trees. Dave said nothing more about it, and I didn't want to push the issue. I felt ridiculous, a seasoned rail worker describing a light that moved at impossible speeds and existed only for me. Later that night, after parking the train and shutting down the cab, I sat in the empty yard. The memory burned vividly, as if etched into my vision. Over the next few days, I obsessively retraced the route, searching for a rational explanation. Headlights, distant airplanes, nothing matched the light's perfect parallel movement, impossible acceleration, and complete disappearance. I've returned to that route many times since. The tree line remains unchanged, the winter frost forming exactly as before. Other conductors laugh when I mention it, dismissing the experience as fatigue or trick of light, but I know what I saw. These days I keep my eyes firmly on the tracks, no longer chasing or watching for that unexplained phenomenon. Here's the rewritten text. The army post at Fort Delaney sits quietly in the Appalachian foothills, a place where night watches can feel endless. I'm Ryan Cole, 28 years old, with nearly 3 years of service under my belt. Most nights on perimeter patrol are predictably quiet, just cricket sounds and the occasional distant rumble of a logging truck. This night was different. Around 1:30 a.m., Sergeant Marcus Hale and I were in our usual tower post binoculars at the ready. A thin moon hung overhead, and fog crept through the trees like something alive, pressing low against the ground. My coffee had long since gone cold as I scanned the tree line. That's when I saw it. A light hovering just above the pine canopy, not like a flashlight or flare, but a soft white glow that seemed impossibly still. It didn't flicker like a firefly or move like an aircraft, perfectly stationary. "Marcus," I said, tapping his shoulder. "Look at this." He squinted through the binoculars. "Could be a training drone," he suggested. "No," I replied. "Drones don't hover this high, and they're never this silent." The light had a strange shimmer around its edges, like heat rising from asphalt, except the air was cold and sharp. We watched, both of us transfixed. Then, in an instant, it vanished. One moment present, the next gone, leaving only darkness where it had been. Even now, years later, when I'm driving alone at night and the sky is clear, I catch myself glancing sideways. Part of me still expects to see that impossible light, moving silently just beyond reach. He pointed and I blinked. Looked again. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. "You're messing with me," I said, gripping the tower. "I don't see anything." Marcus shook his head slowly. "I swear," he said, voice low. "It's right there. You just looked away too long." A cold twist settled in my stomach. Not quite fear, but a deep unease. We stared in silence. My hands grew clammy, ears alert to every tiny sound. The distant wind groaned through pine trees. A branch scraped somewhere. An unseen insect hummed, but no light. Still nothing. Just fog curling over treetops, the horizon empty. Marcus frowned again. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound normal. "A trick of the fog, maybe. Or my tired eyes." He didn't look convinced. Neither did I. We stayed at the post for 2 more hours. My mind kept returning to that light. Each time I tried explaining it away, a satellite, a reflection, a training flare, something didn't fit. Satellites don't hover. Reflections don't float through fog at treetop level. The army doesn't run unauthorized night flares. We rotated patrols. I walked the perimeter, flashlights sweeping the tree line, listening. Once, a faint glimmer caught my eye. But when I turned, nothing remained. Just silent, cold trees and fog. By dawn, I was exhausted. We swapped notes quietly, unsure what to say. The ridge where I'd seen something was now clear. The fog burned away. Just trees. Nothing hovering. Back in the barracks, I tried rationalizing it. Military life plays mental tricks. Long nights, repetitive sounds, monotony. Eyes deceive. Brains fill gaps. Yet I couldn't forget how precisely it had hovered. How unnaturally it vanished. Weeks passed. Night watches continued. Nothing returned. But every time I climbed that tower, I expected it. Every patrol, I scanned the ridgeline. Sometimes I'd joke with Marcus. Maybe it's just waiting to be caught. He never laughed. I never told anyone else. I know what I saw that night, but no one in the military would believe me. Even Marcus, who was there, would probably hesitate to back up my story. The memory haunts me, especially on dark drives home when I catch a glimpse of something on the ridgeline, a faint, still light that seems to hover just at the edge of my vision. My name is Garrett Mason, and I was driving back from visiting my brother in Danbury when it happened. It was just past 11 p.m., and the country roads were empty and wet from an earlier drizzle. I usually drive these routes with music playing and windows cracked, enjoying the sound of tires on asphalt and occasional owl calls, but that night was different. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive, with wet trees creating an unsettling silence. It started subtly. My car's headlights dimmed, not like a battery dying or switching beams, but as if someone had slowly turned a dial down. The dashboard stayed lit, the engine sounded normal, and the windshield wipers kept their steady rhythm. I blinked, wondering if the wet road was playing tricks on my perception, and I saw it. A single, impossibly bright light hovering low over a field to my left, not moving, not flickering, just suspended maybe 10 or 15 feet off the ground. It was round and perfect, with a white so intense it didn't seem natural, even against the night's darkness. I slowed to a crawl, squinting and searching for an explanation. Was it a barn light? A tractor? Some random work light? But there were no buildings, just crops, darkness, and rain-soaked ground. Sometimes, when the night is perfectly still, I swear I see it again, waiting exactly where it was that first night. I don't chase it anymore or watch the ridgeline like I used to. But I never forget. Even now, thinking about it makes my skin crawl. Was it real? A shared hallucination? Something else entirely? I'll never know for sure. What I do know is that on that night, something inexplicable happened. Something that defied every rational explanation I could conjure. No aircraft, no satellites, no training exercise could account for what I witnessed. The silence, the fog, the way it hovered, as if waiting to be noticed, remains etched in my memory. I gripped the wheel, straining to get a better look. My headlights were at full brightness as I approached, but the hovering light remained perfectly still, not blinking or moving. The shoulder was muddy and narrow, so I stayed in the lane, creeping past it with my heart pounding. Something felt deeply wrong. The silence was the most unsettling part, not just the absence of sound, but an unnatural quiet that seemed to wrap around the light. The rain had stopped. The wind was completely calm. Even the sound of my tires on the wet asphalt seemed muted near this strange glow. No engines, no motors, no fans, nothing that could explain what I was seeing. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see another car, maybe a farmer heading home late. But the road behind me was empty. Each glance of the light through the side window made my pulse race. It felt like it was watching me, not like a scanning drone, but with deliberate awareness. The way it hovered just above the ground, its perfect brightness, the complete silence, all of it was deeply unnerving. As I drove past the field, I thought I saw a shimmer, like a heat distortion. But there was no heat, just that unnaturally white glow. My headlights reflected off wet leaves, and for a split second, dark shapes seemed to move at the edge of the light. I first thought of deer, but nothing about their movement made sense. No rustling, no bounding away. I blinked, and they vanished. The field returned to normal, crops slick and still from the rain. My pulse slowed, but a tight feeling remained in my chest. I drove on, constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting the light to follow or disappear completely. It didn't. When I finally turned onto the main road home, the fields behind me were empty. No light, no movement, no distortion. Just the usual dark country road and occasional reflective signs. I tried to rationalize it. A car light, a reflection. Something tricks of wet leaves or clouds. But nothing fit. It didn't move like a car. It didn't react to my headlights. It stayed perfectly stationary when I passed. The memory of my headlights dimming still haunts me, especially because the car never actually faltered. The engine sounded completely normal. The lights returned. And yet, I'd gone out that night just to get away from everything. My name's Laia, and I usually spend evenings on the back porch with a glass of wine watching the stars. I live out in the hills near Ridgewood. The tires kept their rhythm on the road. For a few seconds, something felt off. A sense crept over me that I wasn't entirely alone in the field. When morning came, I shared the experience with my brother over coffee. He laughed it off, suggesting I was tired and imagining things from too much late-night driving. The look on his face stopped me from asking if he'd ever seen strange lights in that area. His reaction wasn't skeptical or scared, just a casual shrug. It was like he'd seen enough weird stuff out here to not be bothered. A few days later, I returned to the field during daylight. Everything appeared completely ordinary. Rows of crops, muddy soil, scattered fences, no traces, no impressions in the mud, nothing. I stood in the middle of the field, scanning the open sky, trying to find anything that matched the glow I'd witnessed. Nothing matched. Since then, I haven't driven out that way at night. My driving has changed. I speed up on turnoffs and constantly check the rearview mirror. Sometimes, when the sky is clear and fields are wet, I catch the faintest glow in my peripheral vision just beyond the tree line. It vanishes before I can focus, but each time my stomach tightens. I've stopped trying to rationalize what happened. It wasn't a drone, a plane, a reflection, or anything human-made, just a bright light hovering low, quiet as the night, with headlights dimming inexplicably. When I tell people this story, usually fellow late-night road travelers, most nod politely and change the subject. A few remember seeing lights, but none describe it like I did. Now, driving past those fields brings a persistent feeling something is watching, waiting silently. The car runs fine. The road remains empty. Yet my hands grip the wheel tightly. I can't shake the image of that perfect bright orb suspended low over the crops, motionless, just watching. Even now, after a rain clears the skies, I glance at the fields. And sometimes, for a split second, I swear I see it again, hovering silent, white and bright, with the world around it still and quiet, as if the night itself has paused. Late October nights aren't usually this warm, and the sky above was perfectly clear, a canvas of black velvet sprinkled with countless stars. Far from city lights, the darkness felt alive with pinpricks of brightness. I was tracking constellations from my old wooden chair, wrapped in a blanket with binoculars around my neck. Something caught my eye, a point of light that didn't behave like the others. At first, I thought it was a satellite, but its movement was different. It jerked and darted, stopping abruptly like an invisible car slamming its brakes. My roommate Mara joined me, bundled in her hoodie and looking skeptical. "What's going on?" she asked. I pointed to the sky, and she squinted. "Looks like a star," she said initially. But then she saw it, the strange, unnatural movement. The light moved with incredible precision, sideways, then pausing midair, then hovering before shifting again. It wasn't gradual or smooth. The motion felt deliberate, almost intelligent. Mara, who rarely entertains my astronomical fascinations, remained unusually quiet. Suddenly, it stopped completely, not just pausing, but becoming utterly still, as if resting on an invisible surface. No heat distortion, no flickering. Then it shot across the horizon fast, almost invisible, except for a lingering glow. The most bizarre moment came when I glanced away and looked back. The light was exactly where it had started, without any transitional movement, just twinkling innocently, like a regular star. Mara looked pale. I knew what we'd seen wasn't normal. My stomach tightened. Something extraordinary had just happened in the night sky. We were outside when it happened. The sky was dark, and stars dotted the landscape like pinpricks of light. Something moved, not like anything I'd seen before. Its motion was too deliberate, too sharp to be random or natural. Mara noticed it too. "La, it's still there," she whispered. I saw it, this point of light that seemed to dance with impossible precision. We watched for an hour, tracking its strange trajectory. But after that initial burst of movement, it remained completely still. Planes drifted in the distance. Stars held their positions. Nothing unusual, except that moment of incredible motion. Inside later, I couldn't stop thinking about it. My phone revealed no explanations, no satellite paths, no flight records, no drone sightings that matched what we'd seen. I tried rationalizing. Maybe it was a trick of light, a reflection from the porch. But I remembered its speed, those sudden stops, how it returned exactly where it started. No reflection moves like that. Nights passed. I'd go outside, scanning the sky, hoping to see it again. Always clear, always steady. But in quiet moments, especially late at night in the kitchen, I'd catch a glimpse. A subtle pulse, almost like a signal, a reminder. I haven't shared the full story with anyone. Mara avoids discussing it, and I know others would dismiss it. But I can't forget. Sometimes I'll stand outside for hours, watching, waiting, tracking everything that moves across the night sky, searching for that impossible light. And occasionally, just occasionally, I'll see it flash by. Precise, unexplained, gone in an instant. Then back as if it never left. I don't know what it was. I just know it wasn't anything ordinary. Night was still when I climbed onto the roof, careful not to wake anyone. My name's Eli Hammond, 16, and I needed to escape the suffocating quiet of suburbia. Late June's cool air carried the wet smell of afternoon rain grass. An old blanket was rolled under my arm, a flashlight tucked in my pocket, though I knew I wouldn't use it. The neighborhood was eerily silent. No crickets, no distant dogs, no rolling tires. The sky was perfect that night. Stars burned unusually bright, Orion standing clear, Juice glowing a faint red, the Milky Way cutting through blackness. I settled on the warm, rough shingles and swung my legs over the roof's edge, staring upward. Then I saw it, a perfectly circular patch of darkness where no stars existed. Sharp-edged, like cut with a precise stencil. At first, I thought it was a cloud catching moonlight, but it wasn't moving with any clouds. Motionless. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Something felt off. Suddenly, it began to glide. Smooth, silent. Across the house opposite me, no wobble, no sound, not a plane, helicopter, or drone. My stomach tightened with that weird sensation of witnessing something inexplicable. I wanted to call my little brother, but something held me back. This was too strange, too quiet. Now, whenever I watch the night sky, I'm hoping to see it again. That point of impossible movement, a dark circle teasing me, waiting among the stars. The unease sits quietly in my chest, persistent, unexplained. Here's the rewritten text. It wasn't like anything I'd seen before. Not a shooting star, not a plane, not a cloud. Something moved across the sky so slowly it felt like time had stretched out. A black sheet dragging itself overhead, blocking out stars in its path. Just as mysteriously as it appeared, it vanished, completely erased from view. I sat motionless, staring at the now normal sky. My heart racing, I scanned the roof around me, expecting to see some shadow or trace. Nothing. Just the ordinary night, quiet and still. Climbing down with shaking knees, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. In my room, I struggled to make sense of it. A shadow? A cloud? A trick of moonlight? But nothing explained what I'd witnessed. Lying awake, I listened to the house's familiar sounds. The refrigerator humming, the clock ticking, finding both comfort and unease in their normality. Days passed and my mind kept returning to that moment. During lunch at school, I'd catch myself staring out windows, searching that same patch of sky. I wanted to believe it was a dream, my imagination playing tricks. But it felt too real. Behind closed eyes, I could still see it. A perfect dark circle moving silently, undisturbed by surrounding stars. I searched for answers, trying to find similar accounts online, but I told no one. My friends would mock me, call me crazy for looking at the sky instead of my phone. The more I tried to explain it logically, the less sense it made. Clouds aren't perfectly circular. Planes don't swallow stars without a trace. Nothing in my textbooks could describe what I'd seen. I returned to the roof on subsequent nights, hoping for another glimpse. Nothing happened. Just normal skies, crickets chirping, distant dogs barking, streetlights casting soft glows on trees. It was as if that night existed only for me. A singular, inexplicable moment. Now, on warm nights with windows open, in the quiet suburb, punctuated by occasional passing cars, I still wonder, is it out there somewhere, gliding silently beyond the horizon? Or was it a unique occurrence, forever unexplained? I no longer chase it, no longer climb onto rooftops at midnight, but the memory remains. A dark, circular imprint I can't quite smooth out of my vision. The morning was still and silent as I trudged through the dense woods behind my uncle's cabin in northern Maine. My name's Aaron Wilkes, and I've hunted these woods most of my life. This day felt different from the start. The rifle slung over my shoulder and the compass clipped to my jacket were my usual companions, with a thermos of coffee rattling in my pack. Something wasn't right. The birds were absent, a stark contrast to the typical 8 o'clock chatter of finches and sparrows that would normally fill the air, even in late October. Only the soft scrape of my boots on wet leaves and distant water droplets breaking from pine needles broke the silence. I tried to shake off the unease. Quiet woods happen sometimes, I told myself. When I checked my compass, things got stranger. The needle didn't behave normally. Instead of pointing steadily north, it began spinning in complete circles, erratic and unpredictable. This wasn't like the subtle magnetic interference from old iron deposits I'd experienced before. This was different, frantic, almost alive. A thick fog had materialized, unlike any morning mist I'd seen. It curled through tree trunks and tangled around branches as if it had grown overnight. The light felt artificial, overcast and grey, but diffused in an unnatural way. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a deer reflecting in the half-light, a pale white shape, about the size of a small elk, moving slowly between the trees. Everything else was moving slowly, silently, and then gone. Nothing explains it, nothing fits. And somehow, even thinking about it, makes the world feel a little less ordinary than it did before. I'm not sure what it was or why I saw it, or if I imagined any of it at all, but it was real enough for me that night. Real enough to make me sit on a roof and just watch the sky, wondering if anyone else in the world had seen it too. The woods felt strange, off-kilter. I was a hunter, but something here didn't feel right. At first, the shape was barely there, a soft white shimmer that pulsed like a living breath between two massive pines, about 50 feet away. Not harsh, just a faint, hypnotic glow that seemed to breathe light. My rifle hung uselessly at my side. I didn't want to move, to disturb whatever this was. A deep, low hum seemed to fill the air, like wind moving through a distant tunnel, but the forest was utterly silent. No bird calls, no wind, nothing. My stomach twisted, but curiosity kept me rooted to the spot. Then, just like that, it vanished. Not by running or moving out of sight, but by simply blinking out as if someone had flipped a switch. One moment it was there, the next, gone. The fog receded, and the woods looked normal again, except for the compass on the ground. When I picked it up, the needle had stopped its frantic spinning, pointing steadily north as if nothing unusual had happened. My pulse was racing, and I stared at the dial, trying to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. I started walking again, hyper-aware of my surroundings. Every shadow seemed too dark, every flicker of light too intentional. I tried humming to break the tension, but it didn't help. I felt small, watched. 10 minutes later, a branch snapped behind me. Just once, then again, closer this time. I froze, heart thumping, rifle raised, scanning the dense woods. But there was nothing. No animal, no human, only lazy fog curling between the trees. I was disoriented, though my compass remained steady. The moss and leaves looked the same, yet somehow wrong, like I'd stepped into a familiar place that was fundamentally altered. I told myself I was being paranoid. I knew these woods. Eventually, I reached the ridge. Sunlight began breaking through the clouds, painting patches of the forest floor gold. I knelt, catching my breath. The strange hum had vanished, and everything felt normal again. The compass lay steady in my hand, the pulsing light nowhere to be seen. On the way back to the cabin, everything seemed ordinary. Birds chirped, wind rustled through the pines. The morning started with fog hanging low in the main woods, and wet leaves squished under my boots. My rifle was clutched close, though it felt unnecessary now. The unease from earlier lingered, making me glance repeatedly at shadows and tree trunks, half expecting something to emerge. Nothing did. When I finally reached the cabin's porch, I set down the compass and surveyed the forest behind me. Sunlight now caught the dew, transforming the landscape into something almost picturesque. The fog had completely vanished. I called to my uncle inside, brewing coffee, but kept silent about what had occurred. How could I explain something I barely understood? The memory of that pulsing glow, the spinning compass, and the absolute silence haunted me. Throughout the day, I desperately sought rational explanations. Electrical interference, soil gases, morning mist reflections, nothing made sense. Weeks later, the experience still consumes me. When walking through woods at night, I compulsively check my compass. The fog catches my attention differently. I study the spaces between trees more carefully, sometimes glimpsing a faint white shimmer at the edge of my vision. In those moments, the world seems to pause. I can't explain it anymore. I've stopped trying. All I know is that something impossible happened in those woods that morning, something that challenged everything I thought I understood about the forest, and perhaps about reality itself. My name's Tom Hartgrove, and I deliver supplies for a small grocery chain, mostly to rural customers who rarely venture into town. That night began like any other delivery run, driving the old white van down Road 17, a twisting path between fields and woods that barely qualifies as a road. It was a humid, early summer evening, the air thick with the smell of freshly turned soil. I'd been driving since 6 o'clock in the morning and was exhausted. My final stop was a familiar farmhouse on a wheat field's edge, accessed by a gravel driveway winding through a small grove of trees. As I pulled up and killed the engine, something immediately felt off. The outdoor lights, porch lamps, yard lights, even a small garage fixture were flickering in a soft, synchronized strobe pattern. I stepped out with a frown, sensing something off. The electrical system seemed wonky in this old place. As I set down the boxes, I noticed an unusual flicker, not the random dance of bad bulbs, but something more deliberate and synchronized. My instinctive glance upward caught something extraordinary. A pale glow hovered above the tree line, drifting with an almost lazy movement that defied the slight breeze. It wasn't a bright spotlight, just a dim uniform haze that hung suspended in the night air. The house light suddenly stabilized, as if the strange flicker had never occurred. My rational mind tried to explain it away, maybe a reflection from clouds or moisture. But something deep inside disagreed. This felt intentional, like something was aware of my presence. While unloading boxes, I couldn't stop looking at the glow. It moved with an unnerving pattern, drifting closer, pausing, then retreating. No sound broke the stillness, just the background chorus of crickets and cicadas. The night felt heavy with an unexplained tension. I scrutinized the area, ruling out typical explanations. No helicopter, no drone, there wasn't even a hint of mechanical noise. Standing in the porch light, I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The shadows around me behaved strangely, bending and stretching in impossible ways, as if the light itself was being manipulated. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the glow vanished. The sky remained unchanged, stars and moon exactly as before. But something had shifted. The air felt thick, charged with an unseen presence. My hands trembled, and the hair on my arms stood on end. With the last box placed, I rang the doorbell, my mind still spinning with what I'd just witnessed. The night felt strange from the moment I arrived at the farmhouse. Mr. and Mrs. Lawson stepped out, bewildered by my presence. When I asked about any unusual lights or sky activity, they stared at me blankly. Lights? We didn't see a thing, Mr. Sir. Mr. Stan. Mr. Sir, Lawson stated firmly. Mrs. impulsive. Lawson nodded in agreement. I let it go and returned to my van, scanning the surroundings. The feeling of being watched persisted. The van seemed heavier, the engines hummed deeper, and somehow distorted. As I drove slowly down the gravel road, I kept expecting to see the glow reappear, but nothing emerged. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw the farmhouse fade into darkness. The mysterious glow had vanished completely. My mind raced, desperately trying to rationalize what I'd witnessed. A reflection, an electrical anomaly, exhaustion, nothing explained what I'd seen. The drive back to the highway was eerily normal. Tree lines remained still, the night quiet, except for the van's humming and occasional owl hoots. I decided against sharing the experience at work. People would dismiss it, and I wasn't prepared to defend an encounter I couldn't explain. Yet something lingered, a sense that the glow had been deliberate, a silent observer watching me set down those boxes. Not threatening, just present. A week later, I drove past the farmhouse in daylight. Golden wheat fields stretched out, sunlight casting everything in a normal, peaceful glow. I slowed down, checking the yard, porch, and tree line. Absolutely ordinary. Since then, I've driven that road countless times, mostly at night. I haven't seen anything similar again, but sometimes, when I'm tired and alone, I sense a weight in the air, a presence just beyond the trees. Not menacing, just watching. I don't understand what happened that night. The farmhouse, the gravel road, the summer air, everything seemed completely ordinary. Yet something was different. As I parked at the depot and unloaded my route, my hands trembled slightly. I told myself I'd get over it, maybe attribute it to fatigue. But even now, when I close my eyes, I see that pale glow drifting slowly above the landscape, a memory that defies explanation. The gravel road threaded through dense pine and birch as I arrived at the lakeside cabin late Friday afternoon. My duffel bag and small cooler accompanied me on this solo retreat. I'm Claire Monroe, and I'd come here to escape the city's noise, hoping to write and find some solitude. Nestled just yards from the water's edge, the cabin was small but welcoming. The first hour passed in a blur of unpacking, lighting the wood stove, and gazing out at the lake. Evening light painted the sky a muddy orange, and the water lay perfectly still, a glassy mirror reflecting the fading day. Everything felt calm, normal. After dinner, I wandered down to the shore. The moon rose low over the tree line, spilling silver light across the water. An unusual silence hung in the air. No insects, no distant woodland sounds, just the gentle rhythm of water against rocks. Midway down the dock, I paused to study my reflection. A broad, slow ripple caught my eye. Something heavy seemed to have moved just beneath the surface. I stood frozen, wondering if it might be a fish, though something this large didn't make sense for the season. The water quickly smoothed out, the moon's reflection returning to its pristine silver sheen. I scanned the lake, seeing nothing. No wake, no splash. Later, from the cabin window, I noticed the surface again. Moonlight hit at just the right angle, revealing faint ripples spreading outward, as if something massive had slipped beneath the water. My flashlight revealed nothing but darkness and moonlight when I investigated. I tried to focus on writing, convincing myself I was just tired. Imagining movement, at the small desk by the window, I scribbled in my notebook. Suddenly, a faint glimmer caught my eye, a soft white glow pulsing slowly beneath the water's surface, something that hadn't been there moments before. The trees outside seemed to flicker with the outdoor lights, aware and calm, vanishing before anyone else could witness it. The dock creaked under my weight as I stepped outside, cold air brushing my face. I set the notebook down and leaned closer to the glass, my stomach tightening. A faint, steady light glimmered beneath the water's surface, but I couldn't make out any distinct shape. When I raised my flashlight and swept it across the water, the glow seemed to retreat, moving just beyond the moonlight's reach. The surface remained a black mirror, as if the lake had swallowed the light entirely. An unease settled over me, not panic, and certainly not the sense of an approaching predator. Something was present. I stood frozen at the dock's edge, watching. Gentle ripples spread across the water, lazy and rhythmic, but without any splash or surface disturbance. My mind raced through possibilities. Fish don't glow. Otters don't make water shimmer like this. The lake wasn't deep enough to hide anything substantial. The thought of calling someone made me chuckle. What would I even say? Hello, there's a mysterious glowing thing underwater? Ridiculous. For about 20 minutes, I watched as the glow pulsed faintly, rising and sinking slowly. Then, suddenly, it vanished. Gone, only fading ripples remained. Quickly settling into a glassy calm, I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and checked from different angles. The lake now reflected the moon as if nothing unusual had occurred. Back inside, I sat by the window, watching. The cabin's quiet was almost oppressive, interrupted only by occasional wind whispers through the trees. I tried convincing myself it was bioluminescent algae, though I knew such blooms didn't happen in late October, especially not with that peculiar pulsing movement. The night passed sleeplessly, the cabin creaked, the fire popped, and I kept glancing at the lake, half expecting the glow to return, but nothing came. Next morning, everything appeared normal. I skimmed stones across the still water, finding no trace of the previous night's strange phenomenon. Over morning coffee on the porch, I wrestled with explanations. Reflection, fatigue, imagination. Yet something lingered, an unexplained mystery that defied rational understanding. I never planned to share this story. My name's Hank Morrison, and I've been farming this land for most of my life. Corn, a few head of cattle, nothing fancy. But that night, everything felt different. The air was cold, just below freezing, with a clear sky full of stars and a thin crescent moon hanging low over the northern field. I was walking up to the silo, my boots crunching over frost-hardened dirt. The auger had been acting up, making a clattering sound I couldn't ignore. I grabbed my flashlight, thinking it was just another mechanical issue I'd have to fix. As I got closer, I saw it. A faint orange glow hovering above the fields, low over the northern corn. At first I thought maybe it was a fire, but there was no smoke, no heat haze. It just floated stationary, as if suspended in the air. I stopped dead, gripping my flashlight tighter, my heart racing faster than it should for just a light. The glow wasn't bright, more like a dim ember pulsing softly, almost rhythmically. I later experienced something similar at a lake cabin. I closed my eyes and saw a soft light pulsing beneath the surface, drifting slowly in the shadows of the lake bed. During my stay, I swam, fished along the shore, and took long hikes into the surrounding woods. Nothing unusual occurred. Yet, when I'd look at the lake, I felt a weight, like something unseen was watching just below the surface. After a week, I left the cabin quietly, the lake calm and silent behind me. On the drive down the gravel road, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a shimmer in the tree line or a reflection in the water I'd just left. There was nothing. Back in the city, I told no one. People would laugh, chalk it up to cabin nerves or tired eyes. But sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I see that faint, steady glow. I see it under the moonlight, drifting slowly beneath the surface. I remember how the lake went utterly silent as it hovered, pulsing beneath the water, aware of me though I could never find it again. I don't know what it was, and I don't try to understand. I just know what I saw. And some nights, I swear I can still feel it watching from under the water, waiting, silent and steady in a lake that should be perfectly ordinary. The cold night pressed against me as I walked toward the edge of the field, the frozen ground crunching beneath my boots. A strange glow had caught my eye, and despite every instinct telling me to turn back, I couldn't stop myself. My fingers, stiff from the chill, fumbled with my binoculars as I tried to get a better look. Just as I raised them, the glow vanished. The field lay empty, bathed in pale moonlight, with an eerie silence that seemed to squeeze in from all directions. I scanned the horizon, finding nothing out of place. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it, maybe a trick of moonlight on ice or drifting fog, but something in my gut knew different. That glow had felt deliberate, with a shape and rhythm all its own. My flashlight cut a thin line through the darkness as I approached the silo, its metal walls reflecting the beam. The auger inside hummed faintly, and everything looked normal when I checked. Outside again, the absence of the glow did nothing to ease my unease. The air felt heavy, charged with an unexplained pressure that made my skin crawl. The wind seemed to carry a low vibration, as if the field itself was holding its breath. I felt watched, though I knew I was alone. My voice cracked as I called out again, louder this time. Silence answered. As I began walking back toward the farmhouse, my flashlight sweeping the field, something caught my eye. The shadows were wrong. while the moon cast long, thin shadows from the corn and silo. The area where the glow had been showed something stranger, shadows bending around an invisible presence. I froze, letting my light wash over the area. Nothing moved, nothing changed. But the feeling was unmistakable. Something had been there, and maybe still was. My pace quickened as I headed back to the house, my flashlight bouncing across the frost-crusted ground. Duke, my dog who had been inside, came running out, barking, as if he too sensed something just beyond perception. I locked the doors and sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the northern field. My hands were still shaking as I poured coffee, trying to focus on the mundane, the creak of old floorboards, the tick of the wall clock, the steam rising from the mug. Everything seemed ordinary, but it wasn't. I had bent down to grab my dog, feeling his fur tense under my hand, when I first heard it, a low, vibrating hum. Distant and almost imperceptible at first, it lasted maybe 2 seconds. The wind picked up, rustling the corn, and for a moment, the world felt normal. Like I had imagined it all. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every sound felt magnified, wind through trees, a distant owl's cry, even the refrigerator's faint hum. It was as if the night was listening while I worked. I kept waking, imagining that orange glow hovering just beyond the field's edge, always out of clear view. The next morning I went out early. Frost covered the ground, corn stalks stiff and rigid. I walked the northern edge slowly, scanning for any signs. Nothing. No tracks, no scorch marks, no disturbances, just the field, quiet under the pale winter sun. I tried talking to my neighbor Pete, but he laughed it off. Orange glow, probably just a reflection from the barn light or the moon, he said. I didn't argue. How could I explain what I knew I'd seen? Since that night I've checked the field many times, from the porch, with binoculars, with just my eyes. I haven't seen the glow again. Sometimes I think I hear a faint hum, but it's never there when I look. Certain nights the air feels heavier, a quiet weight pressing down across the northern field. I've continued my work, tending crops, feeding animals, fixing machinery, always carrying that memory. It wasn't a fire, it wasn't lights from a neighboring town, it was something I can't explain. All I know is that something deliberate and quiet hovered above the fields that night, and by the time I tried to see it properly, it was gone. The night had been long, and I needed to clear my head. My name's Laura Kenny, and I usually run the same loop through Eastwood Park every evening. I've never been a fan of the dark or fog, but tonight was different. The fog rolled in from the north end, thick and heavy, curling around the oak trees like it had a purpose. I slowed my pace near the playground with its rusted swing set and concrete path winding around the pond. Something felt off. The air grew tighter around my chest, heavier somehow. Not normal. Shadows moved differently here, darker and denser than the flickering streetlights could explain. Every time I tried to catch them, they vanished. Standing in the middle of the path, my chest heaved from more than just running. A faint rustling whispered around me, leaves brushing together, but I couldn't tell if it was wind or something else. My phone's flashlight was dead, leaving me with only the pale halos of street lamps to guide me. I told myself I was imagining things. Tired from work, my brain was probably playing tricks, but the prickling at the back of my neck said otherwise. Something was following me, keeping pace without a sound. Each time I looped around a tree or patch of brush, the space behind me seemed to stretch and shift. Passing the pond, the situation grew more unsettling. Fog hung low over the water, blurring the lamppost reflections. My shadow stretched on the path, but another shadow seemed detached, gliding across the water's edge. I stopped, heart hammering. When I looked directly, there was nothing, just an empty pond and mist curling off the surface. Turning back to the path, I caught a flicker at the edge of my vision. A dark figure ducking behind a tree, or maybe not. Only stillness remained, and a sense that something was watching, leaving only silence. A heavy silence that even a farmer who knows his land better than most couldn't explain. The familiar park route had always been a comfort, a predictable loop I'd run hundreds of times. But that night, something felt different. The fog was thick, pressing against the edges of my vision, and my sense of direction began to slip away. My sneakers crunched on wet leaves as I walked slower, noticing strange inconsistencies. Branches where they hadn't been before, puddles in previously dry ground. Then I heard it. A low, barely perceptible sound like soft scraping, fingertips dragging across bark. I froze, listening. Silence immediately followed. My breath thundered in my ears as I slowly turned, scanning the shrouded trees. Nothing moved. Shadows began flickering at the corners of my vision, darting between trees. A fleeting glimpse revealed something unsettling. A silhouette, too thin, too elongated. Not quite human, but each time I turned to look, nothing was there. At the northern edge, where the path meets the street, fog thinned slightly. Street lamps offered their familiar yellow glow, and relief surged through me. Yet the sensation of being watched remained, hanging in the air like an invisible weight. I kept running faster now until I reached my apartment and locked the door. My rational mind tried to dismiss the experience. Late-night run, dense fog, an overworked brain playing tricks, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, lingering just beyond perception. In the following days, I returned to the park. Daytime revealed everything normal: children playing, joggers running, dogs barking. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the memory of that night remained, pressing against the edges of my understanding. I live on the outskirts of Brattleboro, Vermont, with my husband Tom and our 12-year-old son Eli. Our home sits near a modest patch of woods that gives us enough space for a fire pit, some chairs, and a small garden. A kind of quiet setting that makes nighttime feel genuinely peaceful. It was early July, around 9:30, with the sky still a soft blue streaked with clouds holding on to the day's warmth. Tom had built the fire while Eli and I spread out blankets and marshmallows. The evening air was sticky and thick, that kind of humidity that clings to your skin, with crickets just starting their nightly chorus. We settled into our usual evening routine. Tom was recounting his work week, Eli poked at the flames with a stick, and I relaxed, letting the day's stress melt away. The fire crackled, sending sparks dancing upward. Everything seemed completely normal until something changed. At first, the sparks seemed ordinary. They always shoot up during a fire, little flickers of light against the darkness. But then I noticed one that didn't fall. It hung motionless above the flames. I glanced around, thinking it might be a wind trick or a problem with my vision. Then another spark stayed suspended, and another. Now, I avoid running at night. I can't bring myself to face what I saw again. Not with the fog, the trees, and that overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone. When I close my eyes, I still see it, that flickering at the edge of my vision, those elongated shapes that vanish the moment I look directly at them. A faint scraping sound echoes in my mind, like fingernails dragging across bark. Each time, I wonder if I'll ever understand what happened, or if something is still out there, watching and waiting just beyond my flashlight's reach. I've never shared this with anyone, not friends, not family. They'd laugh, say I was imagining things, that fog and exhaustion make the mind play tricks. Maybe they're right, but I know what I experienced. Every time I walk past that park during the day, the hairs on my arms rise. I feel that same weight at my back. Something's there, I just can't see it. And perhaps that's exactly what it wants. The fire crackled softly, its sparks dancing upward before something strange happened. They stopped mid-air, hanging motionless like tiny frozen stars. Tom noticed the shift immediately. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice uncertain. Eli had stopped poking the flames, his eyes locked on the suspended sparks. No breeze moved them, no gravity pulled them down. They simply hung there, defying everything normal. My words caught in my throat when I tried to speak. The fire's usual sound seemed distant, almost swallowed by an unexpected stillness. Even the crickets had gone silent. In a single, seamless instant, the sparks vanished, not drifting down, not fading, just gone. The sudden silence felt like pressure, as if sound itself had been held back and then released all at once. My heart thudded hard enough to make my chest ache. Tom's jaw was tight when he whispered, "Did you see that?" Eli said nothing, just stared, pale-faced, still gripping his stick. I tried reasoning with myself. Maybe it was a trick of light, a strange reflection, something rational. But the sparks had been close enough to see their individual textures. They couldn't just disappear like that. We sat quietly, staring into the fire pit. Gradually, everything returned to normal. Crickets resumed their chorus. The flames flickered as they always had. Our nervous laughter felt forced, like we both sensed something lingering just beyond understanding. We attempted to continue the evening as if nothing had happened. Eli roasted a marshmallow. We chatted about school and work. But each time I looked at the flames, I half expected those impossible sparks to reappear. They didn't. Later that night, I kept checking the windows, scanning the tree line behind our yard. Nothing moved. No lights, no signs. Yet the hairs on my arms kept rising. That inexplicable sensation of being watched, of the world holding its breath just long enough for me to notice something extraordinary. I'm 28 and I live in Santa Fe. My name is Cullen Hayes. I've done enough solo hikes to know when something feels different in the woods. That evening on the Rimrock Trail in the Sangre Cristo Mountains started like any other. I left the parking lot around 4 in the afternoon, packed light with water, snacks, and a flashlight just in case. The weather had been clear, with a few lazy clouds drifting overhead. As the sun sank, the temperature dropped. About halfway up the trail, I reached a small clearing where the light turned a rich orange gold, and the air was thick with pine and damp soil scents. I stopped, set down my pack, and pulled out a granola bar. That's when I saw it, a perfectly circular shadow hanging about 30 feet above the clearing. Back home, weeks after that hike, life settled into its usual rhythm. At the edge of the woods, things seemed normal. Eli sometimes tells the story, brushing it off like a half-remembered dream. Tom hasn't mentioned it since, and I didn't want to make him think I was losing my mind. Yet something lingers. When I pass the fire pit at night, or see sparks rising from a candle or fireplace, I pause. I watch a second longer than usual, half expecting those sparks to freeze, anticipating that impossible silence to press in again. The memory remains sharp. I recall every detail. The suspended sparks, the silence afterward, that sense of time slightly tilting, and the world holding its breath. Sometimes in the middle of the night I wake up thinking I hear that unnatural hush again, as if the air itself is waiting to reveal something beyond sight. I don't know what it was, a trick of the eyes, some atmospheric oddity, something else entirely. But I remember, and I wonder if I'll see it again, or if it was something meant to be witnessed just once. The clearing was eerily quiet when I spotted the shadow. It hung suspended above the ground, dark and distinct against the lighter sky. Not a cloud or a trick of light, but something else entirely. My heart started to pick up a rhythm, not panic, just that unsettling sense that something wasn't quite right. I took a few steps closer, boots crunching on fallen leaves. The shadow remained motionless, hovering at the center of the clearing. Crouching down, I squinted, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. It didn't shift with the wind or change shape. My phone came out, but the screen flickered strangely. For a moment, it seemed dead, then suddenly sprang back to life. The timing felt too weird to be coincidental. As I approached the edge of the clearing, the shadow vanished. No blur, no sound, just gone. An unnatural silence descended. No birds chirped, no squirrels rustled. The usual evening insect hum had disappeared completely. 30 seconds of absolute quiet, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I backed up, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. A weird cloud, a trick of sunlight. But something told me the shadow had been real, intentional. Continuing my hike, the trail narrowed. Tree shadows stretched long across my path. Peripheral movement caught my eye. Maybe a deer, maybe something else. But each time I turned, nothing was there. 15 minutes later, I reached a rocky overlook. Catching my breath, I noticed the stars. It was earlier than expected, but the first pinpricks of light were already visible. The strange encounter in the clearing lingered in my mind, an unexplained mystery hanging as persistently as that shadow had moments before. The trail was steep and narrow in parts, and I wanted to reach the parking lot before darkness fell. The woods around me had gone eerily silent. Usually I'd hear the rustle of small animals or wind through the pines, but now there was nothing except the sound of my own boots scuffing against loose rocks. I'd been hiking for nearly 4 hours, though it felt like an eternity. Something felt off about the time, but I chalked it up to exhaustion and the lowering sun. Earlier, I'd seen something strange, a faint circular shape low in the sky above the opposite ridge. It wasn't glowing, just a slightly darker patch against the dusk. It hovered for a few seconds and then vanished without a sound or trace. Halfway down the trail, movement caught my eye at the forest's edge. I stopped, heart racing. A shadowy figure seemed to be just out of focus, as if my brain was trying to fill in details. When I turned to look directly, nothing was there. My stomach knotted, and I picked up my pace, refusing to look back. By the time I reached the lower clearing, darkness had fully descended. My flashlight beam cut through the blackness, bouncing off low brush and twisted pines. My car sat exactly where I'd left it, headlights off. Sitting inside, hands gripping the steering wheel, I tried to make sense of what had happened. The first circular shadow hovering above the clearing, perfectly still before disappearing, had been strange enough. The second sighting on the ridge only confirmed I wasn't imagining things. Driving back to Santa Fe on empty roads, I kept checking the rearview mirror. What was I expecting? Nothing appeared. Just me, the road, and dark mountains on either side. At home, I told myself I'd sleep it off. but my mind kept returning to the forest's sudden silence, the shadows moving just beyond my vision, and those mysterious circular patches that appeared and vanished. The Desert Mirage gas station sits just outside of Dry Creek, Nevada, a place where silence can be deafening. My name's Tony Rias, and I've spent 2 years working these night shifts. Most evenings blur together, a trickle of locals and travelers passing through, nothing remarkable. This night was different. The air hung motionless, hot desert wind finally dying down. I was stacking soda bottles when something caught my eye, headlights reflecting off a distant ridge. At first, I assumed a car was approaching on Highway 95, which cuts a long asphalt ribbon through endless desert landscape. But something wasn't right. The lights hovered about half a mile out, directly over the hill. 4, maybe 5 distinct light sources suspended in place. The road beneath was completely empty, not just lacking vehicles, but seemingly absent. I stepped outside, dry air pressing against my skin, the sharp scent of gasoline and asphalt filling my lungs. Those lights remained perfectly still. I squinted, rubbed my eyes. Night shifts play tricks on you. Desert mirages are real. I moved closer to the lot's edge, trying to make sense of these strange shapes. They just sat there, glowing softly against the sandy hill's surface. Grabbing my binoculars, I returned outside. The lights hadn't shifted. I focused, searching for any explanation. A car, a truck, anything that might rationalize what I was seeing? Nothing. Slowly, almost deliberately, the lights began to fade. Sometimes I think about that night. The woods, the desert. They felt alive in ways I can't fully explain. Something was there, and then it wasn't. The landscape returned to its usual rhythm, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. I've hiked those trails countless times before and since, yet nothing like this has ever happened again. Late at night, I still wonder about those moments when reality seemed to bend, just for an instant. The desert night was quiet, broken only by the strange phenomenon before me. I'd been watching the lights for about 20 minutes, unable to look away. They sat perfectly still on the hill across the highway, reflecting off the sand in a precise line. This wasn't like a typical heat shimmer. The lights were solid, unmoving. Working in these parts my whole life, I'm not one to jump at weird explanations, but something felt different this time. The air grew heavy, pressing down like a physical weight. I tried calling Luis, my usual closing shift partner, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Not that he could help anyway, living 20 minutes away in town. A low, soft, mechanical hum began, not loud, but right against my ears. It remained constant, steady. My heart raced, though I tried to rationalize it. Cars make strange sounds out here. The desert plays tricks, yet my instincts screamed something was wrong. Movement caught my eye, something darker than the night itself sliding along the ridge's edge. When I turned to look directly, nothing was there. Just those persistent lights, glowing faintly. My skin crawled. I went inside, slamming the door and leaning against the counter. Through the front window, I watched the lights slowly dimming. I checked the security cameras covering the parking lot and pumps, knowing they didn't reach the highway hill. I was completely alone in my observation. Taking out a notebook, I started documenting what I saw. No vehicles were on the road, yet the lights reflected perfectly as if something was driving. Then the wind picked up, a fine sand layer swirling across the asphalt and brushing my legs through the door's cracks. Suddenly, the reflection faded completely. The mysterious hum vanished simultaneously. The desert returned to its profound silence, stillness stretching endlessly in every direction. The night was quiet, a soft autumn chill hanging in the air as I walked home from my night shift at the grocery store. I'm Mark Leland, 32, living alone in a small townhouse on Cedar Avenue in Glenwood, New Jersey. The streets were nearly deserted, with only the occasional car passing in the distance. Later that night, as I worked my shift, the scene was eerily still. A lone tumbleweed rolled across the empty lot, and I kept scanning the highway, desperate for any sign of life. Nothing moved. It was as if the lights I'd seen had never existed. My chest tightened as I realized I'd been frozen in place for nearly half an hour. Taking a deep breath, I mechanically cleaned the counter, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of light or a distant car's reflection. I finished the night without further incident. Driving home, the desert stretched endlessly on both sides, dark and silent. I repeatedly checked my rearview mirror, half expecting to see trailing headlights. Nothing. Just the empty road and the same still night. At home, I tried to laugh it off, telling myself I'd forget by morning, but sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those perfectly aligned lights slowly fading. That weight in the air, the faint hum pressed against my ears, it haunted me. The next day I drove past the station. The hill looked completely normal, featureless, with no shadows or reflections. The highway remained empty and quiet. When friends asked if I'd been spooked, I shrugged non-committedly. And I know what I experienced. The lights had been motionless, never blinking, simply existing before vanishing. That steady, faint hum kept replaying in my mind, as if the desert had briefly come alive before returning to its slumber. Now, every time I drive past, I glance at the hill, expecting to see those hovering lights again. I haven't gone outside after dark near that hill since then. Something about that stretch of desert feels fundamentally wrong. I can't explain it, but I know something was there. Something just out of sight, waiting. The night shift always leaves you wanting something to take the edge off. Walking home, I noticed the street seemed oddly familiar, yet unsettling. Porch lights dotted the darkness, and distant traffic's low buzz provided a baseline of normalcy. Suddenly, every single porch light flickered in perfect synchronization. I stopped, pulling out an earbud. The sudden, coordinated blink felt wrong. No power surge explanation seemed to fit. The street was unnaturally silent. No cars, no transformer hum, just absolute stillness. I tried to rationalize it as an electrical quirk in the older neighborhood, but something felt off. As I continued walking, the synchronized light show lingered in my mind. Approaching the corner of Maple and Cedar, a dim, slow-moving glow caught my attention. Hovering above the rooftops, it moved differently from any aircraft or drone. The movement was unnaturally smooth, almost gliding. A pale yellow light, stretched like an elongated candle flame, drifted horizontally. I blinked. In that split second, the glow vanished completely. Gone. Like someone had flipped an invisible switch. Staring at the now dark rooftops, only occasional street lamps broke the night's darkness. The street felt heavier now. My footsteps seemed louder on the asphalt, and every leaf rustle felt amplified. Passing the Jenkins house, their cat sat in the window, completely alert, staring directly at me. Its posture was wrong. This wasn't a lazy nighttime cat. Something else had its full attention. A soft humming began, unlike any mechanical sound I'd heard before. Night was settling in as I walked down the street, an odd buzzing sound catching my attention. It wasn't quite like an air conditioner, more of a low-frequency hum without a clear source. I stopped and scanned the empty street. No cars, no people, just that faint noise lingering briefly before disappearing. My pace quickened. The phone in my pocket remained untouched, not out of fear, exactly, but a sense that pulling it out might make me miss something important if it happened again. At the top of Cedar Avenue, the strange occurrence repeated. A pale glow hovered low over distant rooftops, moving slowly, almost lazily. Just as I reached the intersection, it blinked out. My heart raced. I tried to rationalize it. Just lights, probably. But my inner voice knew something was off. The way the light moved, appeared, and vanished didn't make sense. The earlier flickering porch lights added to my unease. I hurried home, keys gripped tightly. Once inside, I secured the locks and checked the lights before sitting in the living room. Work notifications buzzed on my phone, but I was too distracted. My gaze remained fixed on the window, half expecting that rooftop glow to return. It didn't. Sleep that night was difficult. Every house creak seemed amplified. My mind kept replaying the synchronized light flickering and that slow, drifting glow. Morning brought apparent normalcy. Streetlights functioned perfectly, houses looked unchanged, and no one spoke of anything unusual. At work, I mentioned the incident to a coworker. He laughed it off, suggesting I was imagining things after a long night shift. Maybe he was right. But I couldn't shake the inexplicable details, the precise timing, the synchronized porch lights, the way that glow moved and vanished so strangely. Now, I walk that route late at night, always watching the sky. So far, nothing significant has happened. Yet occasionally, I catch a faint flicker from the corner of my eye. Each time, the hairs on my neck stand up, a silent reminder of that unexplained night. I was deep in the Penariage National Forest, just east of Gatlinburg, Tennessee. My name is Jeremy Klein, 28 years old, and I had set up camp off a side trail I've hiked before. The location was far enough from the main sites that you only hear the occasional owl or a distant stream. At 2:14 a.m., the night was dark, but not pitch black. A thin crescent moon and faint stars barely penetrated the tree canopy. My small two-person tent suddenly felt vulnerable, its walls trembling with each wind gust. a sound caught my attention. It wasn't like the usual forest noises, no rustling leaves or wind through pines. This had a metallic, almost mechanical edge. I wasn't sure if the hum was outside or somehow inside the tent itself. I tried to rationalize it, maybe a generator from another campsite, but there was no road close enough for vehicles and I hadn't seen anyone else setting up camp. The middle of the night seemed too quiet for such a sound. Slowly, carefully, I unzipped the tent flap, trying not to make a sound. I peered out. The forest was completely still. No lights, no movement, not even the reflective gleam of eyes in the brush. Surprisingly, the hum stopped the instant the flap opened. Only silence remained. The kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every tiny sound your body produces. The faint rustle of a backpack, the sliding zipper, your own breathing. With my flashlight, I crouched and scanned the area. The beam caught rough tree bark, fallen branches, and mossy ground. Nothing seemed out of place. I moved the light in a slow circle, trying to pierce the darkness beyond my clearing. Still nothing. Barefoot, I stepped out, attempting to move quietly. The humming didn't return. I knew my mind was playing tricks, but the sensation of being watched felt real. Something pressed from the shadows behind me. Yet when I spun around, there was only forest. Back in the tent, I tried to calm myself. Maybe it was just wind moving through a fallen branch, amplified by the tent's canvas. I focused on my breathing, on the distant stream, on anything to ground myself. Then I heard it again. Faint, like before, but unmistakable. I noticed something moving slowly along the perimeter of my campsite. Its movement was different, mechanical, not natural. No rustling leaves, no cracking twigs marked its passage. My body froze. A knot formed in my chest, and my mind went blank. I knew I should stay inside the tent, but curiosity pulled at me. I wanted to see, to confirm if what I sensed was real. Carefully, I unzipped the tent and held my flashlight low. The forest was empty. The strange hum had stopped completely. My heart raced as I scanned the tree line in every direction. Shadows might have moved, but they were just branches swaying in the breeze. No glow, no figure, no light revealed itself. Back inside the tent, zipped up and sitting in darkness, I tried to convince myself to sleep and forget the experience. But the feeling lingered. I attempted to distract myself, counting in my head and focusing on simple math problems, yet the sensation crept back into my awareness. Around 3 a.m., a new sound caught my attention. A soft tapping, like metal against stone, came from about 50 feet away. I remained motionless. My flashlight was off, my phone in airplane mode. I didn't want to see whatever might be out there. The tapping stopped. The hum didn't return. Gradually, normal forest sounds reasserted themselves: distant water, wind brushing leaves, an occasional owl hoot. I lay awake, eyes wide, staring at the tent ceiling, my pulse hammered in my temples. Morning arrived slowly, grey and misty, rolling through the pine trees. When I unzipped the tent flap and looked around, nothing had changed. No footprints, no broken branches, no marks in the undergrowth. The forest seemed to have absorbed the night's tension and erased every trace of the experience. I packed up methodically, careful not to rush, and started hiking back to my car. My legs felt heavy, my senses still heightened and alert. The trail remained quiet, but not unnaturally so. Birds began chirping, and the wind carried the scent of damp earth. I stopped several times, half expecting a shadow to flicker at my vision's edge or hearing a distant hum, but nothing happened. By 10 a.m., I reached the parking lot. The asphalt was hot under the sun, and the sounds of passing cars and distant engines felt wonderfully normal and grounding. Here's the rewritten version. My name's Claire Reynolds, and I've been kayaking Lake Whitty since childhood. The cabin my parents left me sits right on the shore, and I know every inch of this water. But that evening was different. A deep orange sky melted into violet, setting the trees ablaze with the last light. I pushed off from the small dock, letting my paddle drip water as I moved toward the lake's center. The water was unnaturally still, like a perfect mirror. Occasionally, a fish would leap, breaking the silence. A lone loon called once. Then nothing. Just the soft lapping against my kayak's hull. About 10 minutes into my paddle, something caught my attention. At first, I thought it was a trick of the fading light, maybe a fish reflection or shadow. But this was different, too large, too deliberate. Just beneath the surface, a faint shimmering light glided alongside me, matching my every stroke. It wasn't like typical sunlight on fish scales. This moved with purpose, almost as if it were aware of my presence. I slowed my paddling, trying to get a better look. The light mirrored my motion, drifting closer with each stroke. When I stopped completely, it instantly vanished. The lake returned to its previous calm. My heart raced, a mix of confusion, excitement, and unease. I tried rationalizing it, perhaps bioluminescent algae or a shore reflection. But nothing explained how this light had followed me through open water. Later, I can't explain what I heard. The timing was eerie, starting and stopping precisely when I moved. Was it a machine? An animal? Something else entirely? I'm not sure if I truly saw shadows moving or if my mind was just trying to make sense of the strange sound. I haven't kayaked there again, and don't plan to. But sometimes, when the wind shifts just right at night, I swear I can feel that same low hum in my chest. Not loud, just enough to make me pause and wonder what was really out there. I was out on the lake as darkness settled in, paddling my kayak, when something strange caught my attention. A light appeared beneath the water, moving with an unsettling precision. No matter how I changed my paddling, slowing down, speeding up, spinning in circles, the light stayed perfectly aligned with my movements. It was a pale, almost white glow with hints of green, shimmering without disturbing the water's surface. I glanced toward the cabin, thinking about cutting my trip short. The lake felt different now. Trees at the far end looked darker, the shoreline more distant. I tried to convince myself it was just the tricks dusk plays on perception, but every nerve in my body was on high alert. Curious, I let the kayak drift without paddling. Nothing happened. The water remained still and ordinary. But the moment I started moving again, the light returned, gliding alongside me with an eerie synchronization. There was no visible source, no shape, just that faint, pulsing glow beneath the surface. I experimented further. I slowed my paddle, barely touching the water. The light hovered cautiously, mirroring my every motion. I tried whistling, calling out, even banging my paddle against the kayak. Absolutely no response. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the light vanished when I stopped paddling completely. The lake returned to its normal state, dark and reflecting the last bit of sunset. Feeling uneasy, I paddled toward the dock, scanning the water, but the mysterious light didn't reappear. I tied up the kayak and sat on the dock's edge, the strange encounter lingering in my mind. I thought about telling someone, but knew it would sound crazy. A glowing thing following me across the lake. I kept quiet. Back in the cabin, I couldn't stop glancing out the windows, half expecting to see that smooth, silent shimmer again. But the lake remained perfectly ordinary, at least for now. I spent the rest of the evening trying to rationalize what I'd seen. The kayak moving across the lake with that strange light beneath the surface haunted me. Tea in hand, I watched the shadows grow heavier in the cabin, and the wind seemed to echo the pulse of light I'd witnessed on the water. Sleep was impossible. I kept replaying the moment, how silently it moved, perfectly following my path. Each time I paused, it would vanish, leaving me questioning what I'd actually seen. At first light the next morning, I returned to the lake, hoping to understand or recreate the previous night's experience. Nothing, just ordinary reflections, normal ripples where fish broke the surface. I paddled the exact same route, repeating every movement from the night before. No light, no shimmer appeared. Since that evening, I haven't kayaked after dark. During the day, I still enjoy the lake, but something fundamental has changed. That precise, deliberate movement beneath the water continues to puzzle me. I keep looking, half expecting it to reappear, but it hasn't. Was I lucky or unlucky to witness something so inexplicable? It wasn't threatening, but it was undeniably deliberate. The knowledge that something could move so perfectly, unseen and silent, has transformed the lake for me. Now it feels like a place with secrets deeper than I can comprehend. The canyon stretched endlessly between Moab and Monticello, Utah. I'm Scott Harper, a freight driver with over a decade of cross-country experience. This route was familiar. I'd driven it countless times, but this night felt different. Past midnight, the desert's emptiness amplified every sound. My truck's tires on asphalt, the engine's steady hum. Even my own breathing seemed louder than usual. It was a clear August night, about 10 deg cooler than typical. The waning moon provided enough light that I rarely needed high beams. I was midway through a long haul from Denver to Albuquerque, carrying refrigerated produce. The truck's cabin was quiet, just the AC running softly. The night drive stretched before me, a long, empty route with nothing but the low hum of the engine. The CB radio was silent, and this section of road was completely deserted. Near the red cliffs, a tight curve approached and something caught my eye. A fleeting glimpse that was more than a simple trick of light. At first, I dismissed it as a reflection from my headlights, but something felt different. The surface was too distinct, too defined. I slowed down, squinting to get a better look. There it was, hovering about 30 feet off the ground, pressed close to the canyon wall, completely motionless. It reflected the moonlight with an almost impossible perfection, like polished metal or glass. The jagged cliff lines mirrored in its surface were clear and sharp. I blinked and adjusted the rearview mirror, convinced my tired eyes were playing tricks. But when I looked ahead, the object remained, frozen, perfectly aligned with the canyon's curve. My heart rate quickened. Nothing unsettles a driver more than an unidentifiable presence in the middle of a dark, isolated road. Gripping the wheel, I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it was a reflective sign or some abandoned construction equipment suspended inexplicably. As I drove past, my headlights passed underneath it, revealing no supports, no wires, nothing holding it up. It simply hovered, reflecting the cliffs with an eerie stillness. Rounding the corner, I glanced right, expecting the object to vanish behind the rocks. Instead, it remained. For a moment, it seemed close enough to touch if my truck were just a bit smaller. But seconds later, when I checked the mirror, it had disappeared completely. No reflection, no shadow, no trace remained. My stomach tightened. I attempted to rationalize the experience. Perhaps it was just a reflective cliff surface that created an illusion of hovering from a specific angle. Yet the more I considered it, the more I recognized something extraordinary. The reflection had been too perfect, too precise, like a mirrored sheet pressed against the rock face. The canyon felt different now, quiet, expectant. I kept scanning the mirrors and cliffs, searching for anything unusual. The shadows seemed sharper, longer than moonlight should cast them. Peripheral glimpses revealed shapes, maybe just rocks, that seemed slightly off, almost alive. The canyon road stretched out before me, a ribbon of darkness cutting through towering rock walls. My mind wandered during the long drive until I noticed something peculiar. Small reflections glinted in moonlight on rocks that should have been matte. I thought I caught movement, but whenever I turned my head, nothing was there. I stopped at a pull-off to stretch my legs, killing the engine. The silence crashed in total quiet, except for a faint wind whispering through rocks. My flashlight scanned the canyon walls. Nothing unusual. Just tired from hours of monotonous driving, I told myself. A low hum tickled my ears for a moment, then faded when I tried to focus on it. I started driving again, lights slow, still noticing tiny strange details. About an hour later, I reached the next town. The hum and reflections had vanished. The cliffs looked flat and silent. At the truck stop, I walked around, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the canyon walls or my imagination. Other drivers were filling tanks and drinking coffee, but their presence didn't ease my sense of isolation. Nobody else had seen anything. I couldn't stop thinking about that hovering surface, perfectly still, reflecting the cliffs, then disappearing without a trace. A week later, I drove the same route at the same time of night. Nothing. No glimmer. The road looked ordinary, moonlight casting normal shadows. Weeks later, I still replay the moment. Sometimes I think I imagined it entirely, but I remember the reflection, how it mirrored the cliff face so exactly, how it stayed as I drove past, how it vanished when I looked back. It wasn't a plane, a sign, or a truck. I don't talk about it much. Most people would laugh it off, but when I drive through that canyon at night, even under the bright full moon, I can't help scanning the cliffs, waiting. And sometimes when the road is empty and quiet, I swear I feel that same weight of stillness pressing in from the canyon walls, like whatever it was might still be there. I live alone on the edge of town in Vermont, where the night sky is a canvas of stars with hardly any light pollution. Most nights, it's just me, the crickets, and the occasional hoot of an owl. My name's Marcus Flynn, and I've always loved stargazing since childhood. That particular spring night was crisp and clear, cold enough to see my breath. I wrapped myself in an old wool blanket and decided to set up my telescope near the back porch. Carefully adjusting the tripod until it was stable, I began scanning the sky. At first, everything seemed normal. Jupiter low on the horizon, satellites blinking as they traced slow arcs overhead. But then something caught my eye. Initially, I thought it might be a plane, yet the lights weren't behaving like any aircraft I'd ever seen. There were 5 or 6 of them, moving together in an unusual pattern. They didn't follow a straight line, but zigzagged subtly, almost as if dodging invisible barriers. Sometimes a light would pause mid-path, hovering briefly before darting off again. I frowned, wondering if I was imagining things. Satellites don't move like this, and planes can't make sudden directional shifts without sound. I blinked, and when I looked again, the lights had drawn closer together, their formation tightening. Rubbing my eyes, I refocused the telescope, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Each time I looked, the cluster seemed to change position, shifting slightly higher, then realigning. I knew the night sky well from years of stargazing and satellite tracking, and these movements defied any pattern I recognized. Through the telescope lens, each light appeared as a pulsating pinpoint with a subtle, almost rhythmic quality. Then something truly strange happened. When I blinked, the entire cluster moved, but it didn't feel random. Instead, it seemed deliberate, as if the lights had somehow reacted to my gaze. I couldn't explain it, but that's exactly how it felt. Like something was watching, waiting just out of view. My gaze was fixed, unmoving, and for several seconds, the lights remained still. Then they began drifting again, tracing odd arcs with occasional pauses, before surging forward as if propelled by an unseen force. Leaning back against the porch railing, I rubbed my temples, my hands trembling slightly. I half expected a drone or remote control device to reveal itself, but the backyard was completely silent. The cold had left a light frost on the grass, and the trees stood motionless against the night sky. At first, the light pattern seemed chaotic, but as I watched, a subtle symmetry emerged. When one light paused, another would shift slightly, almost compensating. This wasn't random. There was a clear coordination. I considered using my phone to record the scene, but something told me the lights would look unremarkable through the small screen. Instead, I continued observing directly. Time became fluid. Minutes or hours seemed to blend together. The stars remained constant, while these lights moved with an eerie precision. They would shift when I looked away and jump forward with each blink. After blinking several times and focusing on a distant star, I noticed the cluster had split into two smaller groups. They mirrored each other perfectly, reminiscent of a kaleidoscope's intricate patterns. Trying to rationalize what I was seeing, I wondered if this might be an atmospheric effect or a reflection of distant city lights. But there were no clouds, no haze, nothing that could explain such deliberate movement. I even called out hello, breaking the tension, but heard only typical night sounds. A distant dog bark, wind rustling through trees, my own breathing loud in my ears. The light's movements began to slow, no longer zigzagging sharply. Instead, they hovered with slight pulsations. The largest light in the cluster seemed brighter, almost closer, yet when I tilted my head, it maintained the same distance against the starry backdrop. A knot formed in my stomach. How could something shift position, change configuration, and yet remain the same size in the sky? The inexplicable nature of the scene left me unsettled, watching and wondering. I'd been driving back from Kansas City after visiting my brother, deep into the night with 6 exhausting hours already behind me. Fatigue was pulling at my eyes, forcing me to pull over and rest. The backyard became my unexpected observatory that night. I walked closer to the yard's edge, searching for a better view. The lights seemed to track me, adjusting subtly as if aware of my movements. They blinked and suddenly aligned in a perfect straight line, slowly drifting toward the horizon. Unnerved, I rushed inside, hoping removing myself from view might make them vanish. But at the back window, they remained faint, shimmering, moving against the starry backdrop in a pattern beyond description. Fear and fascination wrestled inside me. These weren't ordinary things, not satellites, planes, drones, birds, or simple reflections. Something else entirely occupied that night sky. I locked the door and sat on the couch, constantly glancing at the windows. For hours, movement flickered beyond the glass. The lights seemed to continue tracking me, dancing against the stars. Each blink, each movement altered their pattern. Sleep came in broken fragments. Twice I awoke, certain I could see their soft glow through the blinds. By dawn, the pale sky had erased all evidence. Only a strange, lingering tension remained. At first light, I investigated. The yard looked completely normal. Trees, sky, everything mundane. My telescope revealed nothing unusual, yet the memory persisted. I keep scanning the skies, waiting for their return. Attempts to rationalize the experience fail. Temperature inversions, reflections, satellites, nothing explains what I witnessed. They weren't random. They weren't natural. They reacted, they moved, they shifted. Something alive, aware, deliberate existed out there that night. Beyond comprehension, just at the edge of understanding. I don't know if I ever see them again, but I know what I saw, and I know how it felt. I pulled into a rest area off I-7 near Columbia, one of those unremarkable lots with a bathroom building, and a few vending machines. Half the lights buzzed, creating an atmosphere that never quite feels safe, but serves its purpose when exhaustion takes over. Scattered across the mostly empty parking area were 3 vehicles. A semi idling near the entrance and 2 cars parked apart. My car was at the far end, doors locked, seat reclined. Before dozing off, I checked my phone. 12:19 a.m. The next thing I knew, sound woke me. The radio was on, filling the car with low, static something I never do when shutting off the engine. The dial light glowed a faint blue, speakers whispering that familiar empty air hiss. For a moment, I thought I might have accidentally hit a button while sleeping, but I hadn't moved. What caught my attention was how the static felt not loud in volume, but somehow consuming all the space around me, as if it existed in the air itself. Just before touching the radio knob, something caught my eye through the windshield. Above me, faint lights were moving in the sky. These weren't reflections or lot lights, they were different. 3 or 4 lights circled each other slowly, like fireflies trapped in a silent orbital dance. No blinking, no strobing, just smooth, deliberate movement that defied explanation. Airplanes don't move like this. Helicopters make noise, drones buzz. These were completely silent. I cracked the window, hoping to hear something, anything. Only the distant hum of the semi's engine broke the stillness. The lights continued their strange performance directly overhead, sometimes spreading apart, then closing together again. They seemed almost aware of my presence, tracing precise loops that felt calculated, not random. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed to start the engine and flee, but I was frozen. Something told me that any sudden movement would break whatever strange moment was unfolding. The static continued its whisper, the lights continued their dance, and I remained perfectly still, a witness to something I couldn't understand. I'd spent months hiking the Smokies, so this trail near Cosby wasn't new to me. Early October, with the leaves just starting to turn, I set out late afternoon to cover about 7 miles, planning to camp overnight and loop back the next day. The route was familiar, and I wasn't concerned about being alone out there. As the sun dropped behind the ridgeline, I found a small clearing not far from a creek. It wasn't an official campsite, but the ground was flat, and an old fire ring suggested others had camped here before. I dropped my pack, boiled some noodles, and settled in for the evening. The woods around me came alive with night sounds. Crickets chirping, tree frogs calling, occasional rustling from small creatures moving through the underbrush. I felt completely relaxed, almost lulled into a sense of calm. Later, I was driving through the night, gripping the steering wheel and staring upward. The radio static began to change, pulsing softly like someone was slowly adjusting the volume. With each wave, I could almost feel it in my teeth. I ducked down, sliding lower in the seat, as if hiding would make any difference. From this angle, I could only see the faint glow passing across the car's ceiling fabric. The static maintained its slow, rolling pattern. My phone sat in the cup holder, untouched. The thought of its sudden light felt somehow dangerous. Eventually, the glow shifted, spreading out and drifting toward the tree line behind the rest stop. The static thinned, softening to its usual quiet hiss before cutting out completely. The radio clicked into silence as if it had shut itself off. When I sat up and looked out, the stars appeared normal. The sky was empty. Sleep was impossible after that. I started the car, pulled out of the lot, and drove the next 2 hours to St. Taper. Louis, my eyes burning and my head pounding. By the time I reached the city, the entire experience felt unreal. But the radio had definitely been off when I parked. Those lights, I couldn't make sense of how they moved. That's all I know. It happened, then it was over, and I never saw anything else on the road that night. The woods were humming with a familiar rhythm, insects creating a soothing backdrop that signaled everything was normal. Stretched out against my pack, I watched stars peeking through the tree canopy when suddenly, without warning, every sound vanished completely. No gradual fade, no shift, just absolute silence. Crickets, frogs, even the creek went quiet in an instant. My first thought was a predator might be nearby. Sometimes owls or coyotes can quiet the forest, but this was different. No sounds of movement, just an eerie stillness pressing against my ears. As I sat up and scanned the tree line, something strange caught my attention. The stars were missing, not obscured by clouds. There weren't any that night. Directly overhead, a huge, dark section had simply erased part of the sky. A clean, sharp shape that looked unnatural. I wondered if my eyes were playing tricks, like when you stare too long and lose focus. But then it moved. Slow and steady, the shape slid across the sky. No edges, no lights, no sound, just a massive darkness blocking stars wide as my outstretched hand. Frozen in place, I craned my neck, trying to gauge its height. That was the weirdest part. I couldn't tell if it was 100 feet or 1,000 up. No perspective, just this starless void drifting overhead. The longer I watched, the more details emerged. It wasn't pure black. A faint distortion shimmered along its edges, like heat rising from hot asphalt. Staring too intently made my eyes water. Without thinking, I grabbed my flashlight and switched it on, pointing upward. The beam didn't reach far, catching only a hint of haze. Something changed when the light hit. The shape seemed to slow, not stop, but definitely react. My stomach dropped. I clicked the flashlight off instantly, sitting motionless in the darkness. The woods felt suspended, holding their breath. For what seemed like an eternity, though probably less than a minute, it continued its gradual passage, then just as slowly disappeared. The first thing I remember was waking up to a light. Not a sound, not movement, but a faint, steady glow bleeding through the nylon walls of my tent. Pale, almost white, with the slightest hint of blue. It didn't pulse like a flashlight, or flicker like a fire. It was just there, even and soft, bright enough to make me squint while lying in my sleeping bag. I wasn't supposed to be seeing any light. I was camped alone, miles off a logging road in northern Vermont on the edge of a small clearing near a stream. Earlier that day, I had hiked in, pitched camp before sunset, cooked dinner on my little stove, and gone to bed early. No one else was out there. I hadn't even seen another car at the trailhead. At first, I thought maybe the moon had broken through the clouds. It had been overcast when I'd gone to bed, but this glow didn't feel like moonlight. It was too focused, too direct. My tent was lit up evenly on all sides, like something was hovering just above me. I lay there holding my breath, waiting for it to fade. It didn't. The glow just kept on, steady and strange. I finally sat up, unzipped the top of my tent. The sky thinned out, and the stars came back into view one by one. The forest remained silent. It was another 5 minutes, maybe more, before a single cricket started chirping, then another, until everything slowly returned to normal. I didn't move until that happened. When the night sounds finally came back, it was almost overwhelming. I remember exhaling like I'd been holding my breath the whole time. I thought about packing up and hiking out right then, but it was pitch black and the trail was rocky. I ended up crawling into my tent and zipping it all the way up even though it was warm out. I kept the flashlight in my hand and lay there, listening to every twig snap and leaf rustle, convinced it was circling back. I didn't sleep much. Every time I dozed off, I'd jerk awake. Sure, the silence was going to drop again, but nothing else happened. In the morning, the woods were perfectly normal. Birds were loud, the creek was running steady, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. I packed up, stuck to my loop, and got out of there by noon. I didn't tell anyone about it until a couple weeks later. Even now, I'm not sure how to explain it. All I know is that when the woods go that quiet all at once, it's not something you forget. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening. Silence enveloped me completely. The usual night sounds, the nearby stream, the soft buzz of insects, had vanished. This sudden quiet felt unnatural, almost heavy. My watch read just past 2 a.m. and my phone was off to conserve battery. Something was different. I stared at the tent walls, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Curiosity eventually overcame my growing unease. I slowly unzipped the tent flap, just a few inches at first. The light outside was blindingly bright compared to the tent's darkness. When I pulled the flap open wider, the glow seemed to move, not switching off abruptly, but drawing itself upward. The clearing was bathed in a pale blue light, as if frost had been painted across the landscape. Shadows stretched unnaturally, pointing to a central source directly overhead. Looking up, I saw nothing definite, just pure light. It hovered low, just above my tent, close enough that I felt I could almost touch it with a long stick. Then it began to retract, shrinking and fading as if being pulled by an invisible line. The higher it rose, the dimmer it became, until it was just a faint smudge against the cloudy sky. Moments later, it vanished completely. The darkness that rushed in afterwards felt oppressive. My eyes struggled to readjust. The clearing looked exactly as it had when I'd set up camp. Black trees, silver-grey grass under starlight, absolutely motionless. The normal sounds hadn't returned. I sat there with the tent flap half open, waiting. Time seemed to stretch. A minute might have passed, or perhaps 10. Eventually, I zipped the flap shut and lay back in my sleeping bag. Forcing myself to breathe steadily, I considered packing up and hiking out, but quickly dismissed the idea. Walking through pitch-black woods after what I'd witnessed seemed far more terrifying. Sometime around 4 a.m., I drifted into a light, restless sleep. Morning brought clarity. Sunlight filtered through the treetops, and everything looked ordinary, except for one detail. Just outside my tent, the grass showed a distinct disturbance, not trampled, exactly, but pressed down in a perfect, precise circle, spanning about 10 feet across. I was flying freight that night, a routine run from Kansas City to Denver. One of those quiet flights with just me, a load of boxes, and a cockpit full of calm. It was late, close to midnight, when I leveled off around 30,000 feet. Clear skies stretched out before me, steady air making the journey smooth. About an hour into the flight, something caught my eye off my right side. At first it looked like another plane flying parallel to me. Nothing unusual. You see other traffic all the time. But this one felt different. Maybe a mile out, maybe less, holding steady like we were perfectly synchronized. Its strobes and navigation lights had that familiar rhythm. Red and green, white flash every few seconds. I glanced down at the scope, fully expecting to see a transponder signal. Nothing. Just my own return and some distant traffic 10 or 15 miles away. I tapped the glass, adjusted the brightness. Still nothing. I called Kansas City Center. Cargo 79er. Do you have any traffic? 12 o'clock 1 mile. Same altitude. A pause. Then the controller. -79er, closest traffic is at your 10 o'clock 12 m. Climbing through 27, I pressed my lips together and looked back out. The other plane, or whatever it was, remained exactly where it had been. Same altitude, right where my eyes said it should be. It wasn't weaving or drifting, just hanging there, like it had some precise reason to fly wingtip with me. I considered whether it might be a military aircraft running dark that the lights didn't match. Too bright, too clean, a civilian pattern, not tactical. I tried to convince myself my scope was acting up. Avionics can get finicky sometimes, though I'd never had one fail before. Days earlier, I'd been camping. I remember standing there with my coffee, steam rising into the cool morning air, staring at something that made no sense. The grass around my campsite looked strange, blades bent outward, radiating from the center as though something had hovered close enough to push them flat. No wind, no large animals, no people, just me and that light. I broke camp quickly, packed everything, slung my pack over my shoulders, and left the clearing behind. But I could still picture that glow, the way it slid upward when I looked at it, like it had been caught in the act. I was on the porch needing space after a heavy day at the clinic. Paperwork and patient files had worn me down, leaving me restless. The house felt suffocating, so I stepped outside. During a routine flight, something strange happened that I'd never experienced before. I kept stealing glances at another plane, watching it hover at the same distance. Its lights pulsed steadily. 10 minutes passed, and an unsettling feeling grew deeper. This wasn't normal. Suddenly, the plane transformed. Where a solid aircraft had been, only 3 distinct lights remained, suspended in a loose triangle. No fuselage, no recognizable shape. I blinked hard, wondering if my eyes were deceiving me. But no, these weren't stars. They were too bright, too deliberate. The lights began moving with an eerie purpose. One climbed higher until it faded from view. Another drifted forward, blending into the horizon's haze. The third slid backward, disappearing behind my wing into the night's darkness. My heart raced. Arms sweaty against the yoke, I stared into the emptiness where the lights had been. The radio continued its routine chatter, controllers managing flights that knew nothing of what I'd witnessed. I considered reporting it, then stopped. What would I say? A plane that dissolved into floating lights? I could already imagine the skeptical silence. Pilots talk. Stories spread. Nobody wants to be known for telling strange tales. For the rest of the flight, I scanned the windows, expecting the lights to return, but the sky remained ordinary, just the steady hum of engines filling the space. By the time I landed in Denver, the experience felt dreamlike. But it wasn't a dream. I'd recorded the time on my knee pad, a precise note with no context. 12:47 a.m. the mark remains, a silent testament. When I close my eyes, I still see that second plane, perfect in formation, then dissolving into 3 lights that drifted away as if summoned elsewhere. Those moments hang with me, unexplained and vivid for. The night was settling in, soft and cool. Late May hung around me like a gentle blanket, warm enough to be comfortable, but with a slight chill that made me pull the throw closer. I was in the swing on the porch, my glass of something light and cold beside me, Rosie, our old beagle, curled at my feet. The neighborhood hummed its quiet evening song. A distant TV murmured through an open window. A car passed somewhere far off, and a dog barked twice before returning to its nighttime quiet. The small kitchen radio had been playing softly earlier, its voice drifting out the back window before fading as screens went dark. I always watched the sky at this hour. It's my way of saying goodbye to the day. The moon was a thin sliver, and stars were beginning to puncture the black sky like pinpricks of light. Rosie shifted occasionally, her nose tucked in, peaceful. Then something changed. The crickets, which had been a constant background noise, suddenly stopped. Not a gradual fade, but an abrupt silence, like someone had muted a soundtrack. It was the kind of quiet you notice like the sudden absence of a refrigerator's hum. Rosie's head lifted. She looked up at the maple tree, her ears pricked in that way dogs have when something isn't quite right. I set my glass down and listened. For a while, only the distant highway and a screen door's soft thunk broke the silence. The porch light did something strange. It didn't flicker or pop, but softened as if someone had gently turned down the brightness. The light pool across the steps thinned, and the swing shadow stretched longer. I told myself it was just an old bulb, that I'd replace it in the morning. A few heartbeats later, the light returned to normal. The stove's green LED clock blipped, jumping forward by 2. Small moments, easily explained, but something felt different. The night had gone silent, crickets long forgotten. The kitchen clock's tick seemed to echo in the stillness. I checked my phone, finding only a single bar, and that persistent searching circle. The network was out. Rosie perked up, giving a small bark at the maple tree. Her stance was tense as she padded to the porch's edge, peering into the yard. I joined her, leaning against the railing. The sky above was a canvas of stars, with Orion hidden for those who knew where to look. A single star caught my attention, bright and steady on the left side of the sky. I watched it, a habit from years of pointing out constellations to my children. Then something changed. The star didn't gradually brighten, it exploded into light. In an instant, it transformed from a distant pinprick to a glaring bulb, a change so sudden it felt like a sharp cut. Suddenly, the entire yard was bathed in a cool, silvery light. It wasn't warm like a porch light, but something entirely different. Colors flattened into a high-contrast sketch. Coral roses now had hard, white edges. Each blade of grass stood out like paintbrush strokes. The hairs on my forearm tingled. The air felt thinner, as if the night had been subtly drained away. This wasn't a focused beam or a traditional light source. It was as if the sky itself had become a lamp, casting its glow across my yard. Shadows sharpened dramatically. The house across the street looked like an overexposed photograph. Even Rosie's eyes reflected an unnatural silver sheen. My mind raced through practical explanations. A flashlight, a sport camera, a truck spotlight, but nothing made sense. The light came from above, where stars normally live. It wasn't a plane. There was no motor sound, no strobes. Just an eerie, all-encompassing illumination and the distant highway's hum. My heart raced, and I found myself calling out, though I'm not sure why. I called out to Evan, wanting him to witness what I'd seen. His voice drifted from the kitchen where he'd been fixing something, always methodical about putting tools away near the sink. When he answered, I heard his footsteps on the tile. Outside, I said abruptly and urgently. By the time he reached the door, the light had changed. The star had returned to its usual position, and the yard was bathed in the familiar golden glow from the porch light. Evan stepped out, rubbing his hands as if cold, though the air was mild. What? He started. The star, I said, my voice tiny. The entire yard had been illuminated, and I knew I sounded like someone about to be folded into a sensible explanation. He looked up where I pointed, squinting. The pinprick of light hung there, innocent yet somehow wrong. I don't see anything, he said, as if he'd missed part of my explanation. He drew closer, draping an arm around my shoulders in that comforting way he does when someone seems unsettled. Maybe it was lightning or a plane, he suggested. No, I insisted. It was bright. Everything was lit like daylight. I described how shadows had become razor-sharp, how the roses looked white-edged. I told him how Rosie had stared at the sky, as if seeing a person. He listened, slow and attentive. Maybe your eyes were tired, he said, not meaning to sound dismissive. We stood in the cooling golden light, and I watched him searching for a practical explanation. He was trying on reasons like someone testing coats, looking for the right fit. What I wanted was for him to say, I saw it, too. Shared witnesses make experiences feel more solid, less uncertain. Instead, he asked, "Want me to check the street?" I nodded. He walked to the yard's edge, down the path, leaning over the low fence. The street looked unchanged. A car near the lamppost, a distant silhouette walking a dog, the soft orange glow of sodium lights. He glanced back, then returned, looking untroubled. "Nothing odd," he said, and went to flip through the radio in the kitchen. The porch bulb held steady, and everything else behaved like an old friend. That night, a blink of brightness had unsettled me in a way I couldn't name. The router's light kept blinking its polite pattern, and my phone returned to full signal as if nothing had happened. The tiny blue LED on the stove showed 11:43 unchanging. While he made tea, I kept thinking about the light and replaying that instant, when the yard transformed from ordinary to near daylight. The roses looked like they'd been sketched in white. I felt silly and small for being thrown by a moment of intense brightness. But the ordinary things of the house mug handle, tea steam, the soft ticking of the clock were a small, precise proof that the world had not ended. Not even a little. We didn't tell anyone. Who would you tell? I thought of calling the neighbor who charts weather, or the city police, or an astronomer at the university. But then the practical pile formed again. Morning patients, bills, a child's rehearsal. The list of what must be done shrank the night down to normal size. I wrote a note in my phone, saw a bright skylight, 11:38 p.m., no details, just a stub of evidence. That night I woke twice and went to the window, because habit is an odd form of superstitious logic. The sky was the same as before, stars, moon, a bit in a sliver. Rosie slept in her crate, lungs slow and steady. The next evening, the news was full of a local council meeting about zoning. Nothing about lights or sky phenomena. The week after that, I walked the yard in daylight, looking for any scorch on the grass. A melted leaf, anything to explain the intensity of the brightness. There was nothing unusual, just the ordinary tracks of the sprinklers and the faint ring where a bird had pecked last week. Sometimes I caught myself staring up, waiting for the star to flare like a hand turning a switch. I kept expecting some repeat, a pattern, a reason. Life resumed its usual steady sequence: work, dinner, the town routine. The note on my phone sat there like a small relic. I read it sometimes, like reading an odd sentence someone else had written about the world. I don't have a tidy explanation. The night folded the event into itself with the quiet persistence of things that don't need telling. I only remember a sudden high white light that sharpened shadows and flattened color, and by the time Evan reached the porch, the sky had closed its mouth and returned to being night. The garden remained unchanged, with roses no paler than before and maple leaves just leaves against the sky. I left the bar a little past 3, sliding into my old sedan with too many miles. Closing time sneaks up, and the back roads are faster when the highway is empty. The town slept under half-lit sodium lamps, and earlier rain had left the asphalt like glass. I headed out on Route 7 as usual, windows cracked a hair to keep me awake, playlist low, thinking about nothing more than getting home. The cold was sharper than the forecast predicted. A thin chill that slips under your collar. Black-field shapes stretched on either side of the road, with the tree line a hard, dark boundary against the clouds. About half a mile in, I realized the birds had vanished. Not gradually quieted, but simply stopped. Suddenly, only the engine's hum and the steady wipers breaking through leftover drizzle filled the air. That unnatural silence pressed a weight into my chest. Something had shifted in the world's rhythm. A light caught my eye among the trees to the right, low and nestled between trunks. Initially, I assumed it was a hunting truck's misaligned headlamp or a kid's flashlight. A single steady white point maybe 30 or 40 yards off the road. I kept driving, thinking nothing of it. Then the light began to move, not like an animal jumping or sweeping flashlight, but pacing perfectly alongside my car. It stayed level with the hood, tucked into the trees, visible only as a pin of light. Without thinking, I eased off the gas. You do that. Slow down to check if another driver needs help or something's on the road. The light matched my speed precisely. I nudged the accelerator. It nudged too. It remained perfectly parallel, like an invisible car drove beside me in the ditch. I tried convincing myself a hidden road must be behind those trees, maybe a trucker following the same route, but each time I looked, nothing changed. The woods seemed empty, nothing but trunks, saplings, and thick underbrush through the branches. As I edged closer to the shoulder, the light matched my movement without effort. No flashing, no beam cutting into the road, no reflection on the wet pavement. Just a steady pin captured in my side mirror. Something strange happened with the radio. One moment, an old half-remembered song played. The next, it erupted into static, but not ordinary static. This was clean and flat. like a whiteboard switched on. A faint hum threaded through the noise, too low to be a musical note, and too consistent to be the heater. At the exact moment the hum cut out, the light leaned forward slightly, as if peering through the trees. My dashboard clock, ignored all night, blinked once and reset to 12. I rationalized it away. The car was tired, the battery old. Batteries hiccup, cars hiccup. No need to scare myself. A fox darted across the road ahead, moving fast and low. Despite its speed, it didn't look startled. Head down, tail tucked. It moved with purpose, like it was on a mission. In deer season, a herd would typically crowd this county road. Tonight, nothing. No distant headlights, no shapes on the horizon. The light hugged the tree line, following the wood's contour rather than any human path. I slowed to 40 dash, a subtle test. The light matched my pace. At 30, it eased back. In cruise control, I watched the mirror. My tail light hung red and dull. Beside it, the white pin moved with deliberate patience. I scanned the trees, searching for a walking path or a reflective jacket that might explain the light. Nothing answered. A part of me wanted to stop, step out with a flashlight, and investigate. Old stubbornness battled with curiosity. But practical thoughts interrupted. Kids at home, a dog to feed, rent due next week. Rational concerns won. I pushed the gas and drove on, leaving the mysterious light behind. The road stretched out before me, dark and winding. My speedometer needle crept higher beyond the legal limit, and the surrounding landscape blurred into a stream of shadows. A light persistently followed, matching my every move with uncanny precision. Whether I navigated straighter sections at 50, 60, or near 70 miles per hour, or curved through narrow passages, the light remained constant, tucking in close when the road tightened, never cutting ahead or falling behind. Something felt off. My reflexive high-beam flash into the darkness yielded no response. No flinch, no reaction. A cold, subtle fear began to thread through my consciousness, not the kind that triggers panic, but a quiet unease that made my knuckles whiten as I gripped the steering wheel. I reached for my phone, hoping to document this strange occurrence. No service. The camera captured only a grey smear where trees should have been. Video footage revealed nothing but fuzzy tree silhouettes. Feeling slightly ridiculous, I pocketed the device. Small anomalies began to accumulate. The familiar mile marker post near the bend, always marked with a reflector, was inexplicably gone. A shallow rut appeared where none had existed before, tugging briefly at the steering. The windshield wipers skipped and clipped at an irregular rhythm. These minor disruptions, individually insignificant, collectively built a growing sense of unease. As the tree line finally opened, revealing the approach to town and the old Miller Bridge, the strange journey seemed to reach a culmination. Years of trusted instruments and familiar routes had suddenly become unpredictable, transforming a routine drive into something unsettling and mysterious. The town felt ordinary as I drove, the radio humming low with talk shows. A gull called from the river, its sound inconsequential against the night. Earlier, something strange had happened along the road, a light that moved with an uncanny patience, hovering near the trees in the municipal lot. I remembered how it matched my pace, staying close until the traffic lights ahead warmed the sky with their orange glow. Then, just like that, it vanished. No dramatic exit, no flare one moment, a pinprick in the darkness, the next simply gone. At the diner, old men sat with coffee and newspapers. I could have pulled over, called the police about the light, maybe asked if anyone had seen a hunter or a photographer with a lantern, but the town seemed stubbornly uninterested, awake yet unchanged. When I got home, the house was dark but lived in. Jess greeted me from the kitchen doorway, already pouring a mug of something warm. I told her about the light that had followed me, and she laughed, the kind of laugh that humor gives to late-night stories. Maybe a hunter with a headlamp, she said. I wanted to explain more about the radio, the missing post, how the light had kept pace as if driving its own road, but some part of me knew that saying the details would make them real, so I kept them folded away, like a secret note tucked into a drawer. That night I slept fitfully, waking to check the window. Nothing but the porch lamp and distant shadows broke the darkness. It was past 1 o'clock in the morning when we walked home. The streets were empty and cool, with a hint of rain in the air. Me and Kyle had just left Marcy's place after getting caught up talking about some movie, losing track of time during one of her low-key Friday hangouts. We cut through Maple Avenue, a stretch of cracked sidewalks and half-working streetlights. Most were dark, with a couple flickering and buzzing faintly. I had my hoodie up, hands in my pockets, While Kyle walked a step ahead carrying leftovers Marcy had packed for us. We weren't talking much, just sharing that tired quiet that settles in when the night winds down. About halfway down the block, something strange caught my eye. My shadow stretched impossibly long in front of me, which made no sense since the nearest street light was behind us. I stopped walking and looked closer, wondering if I was imagining things. But it wasn't just me. Kyle's shadow stretched toward me from the opposite direction, as if we were being lit from two different angles at once. "Dude," I said, pointing down. Kyle stopped, looked down, then back at me, then back at the ground. What the hell? Our shadows overlapped in this weird, unnatural way, pulling toward each other from opposite sides. Later, when I checked my phone, the photo file showed only trees and black sky. Nothing that matched the strange sensation of that moment. I told a work buddy about it a week later. He offered practical explanations, maybe a photographer, or a county survey crew with a strange lamp. These answers lined up neatly, and I wanted to check them off and close the file. But every time I drive that stretch now, I look at the tree line and wonder what was with us that night. There's a small space in my memory where a white dot sits, patient and parallel, neither threatening nor friendly. I keep thinking about how a small event can change the entire feeling of a road. I don't know what it was. I only know something was there, moving beside us, and then it vanished when the town began. A strange stillness hung in the air as headlights swept across us, but no sound followed. No engine rumbled. No moving glow traced the street. We simultaneously looked upward. Nothing but a clear night sky greeted us, with the town's faint glow barely visible near the distant horizon. No plane lights, no drone buzz, just silence. The silence wasn't complete. A distant dog barked. A refrigerator hummed from somewhere nearby. The air felt thick, almost suspended. The screen refused to light up. He tapped repeatedly, shook the device, and grumbled about a dying battery. My phone behaved identically. A brief half-second flicker before darkness, both phones dead, despite mine being at 70% charge just moments ago. An unsettling coincidence. We stood motionless on the sidewalk, shadows stretching weirdly, dead phones in hand. An unspoken mutual feeling urged us to keep moving. As soon as we walked, our shadows snapped back to normal, trailing behind us under the streetlight's glow. We paused again, looking down, then up. The sky remained empty. Kyle's nervous laugh broke the tension. Guess we're sleep-deprived or something. I stayed silent. My skin felt electric, every hair standing on end. I suggested cutting through the park instead of continuing down Maple Street. It wasn't shorter, but anything beat walking that eerie sidewalk with its flickering lights. The park was darker. Years of broken lamps left only moonlight filtering between trees. Our gravel footsteps sounded unnaturally loud. Halfway through, a soft rushing sound caught my attention. Not loud, not clear, just a concentrated wind-like noise overhead. We both stopped, scanning the black sky studded with stars. The sound simply ceased, not trailing off like a typical aircraft. "You heard that?" I asked, my voice thin in the darkness. We waited until the sound completely disappeared. Then, impossibly, the park's long broken lights flickered. The night began at a campsite nestled just as the sun dropped behind the ridge. 4 of us had made the trip. Me, my brother Mark, his friend Lisa, and my buddy Jordan. The trailhead was nearly empty, which suited us perfectly. We'd been craving a quiet mountain weekend without other people around. We set up in a small clearing just off the main path, with enough space for our tents and a fire ring that looked untouched for ages. The air was dry, catching in our throats with each deep breath. Mark and Jordan headed out to gather firewood, while Lisa and I started unpacking our gear. The forest hummed with late summer stillness, occasional bird calls, a soft breeze rustling pine needles, the distant murmur of a stream. Later that night, something strange began to unfold. Lights in the park flickered weakly, a dim orange glow that buzzed overhead before cutting out after just 10 seconds. We were left blinking in sudden darkness. Kyle swore quietly and picked up his pace. I followed closely. We didn't speak much until we reached regular streets. Then the truly bizarre started happening. As we walked down Birch Street, motion lights began triggering ahead of us, one after another. They'd blink on in a yard, then go dark as we passed, with the next light flaring up. This wasn't synchronized with our movement, always one house ahead, as if something invisible was tracking our path. Kyle kept glancing between the yards and me, waiting for me to comment. But what could I say? When we reached my place, both our phones suddenly came back to life. simultaneously, his screen filled with missed notifications. Mine went from black to the lock screen, battery still at 70%, with no restart or delay. We parted quickly. He lived 2 blocks away and seemed eager to end the encounter. Back in my room, I sat by the window watching the street for hours. Nothing else happened. The night looked ordinary, but those shadows pulling in opposite directions under an empty sky haunted me. This wasn't from headlights or moonlight. It was something above us, unseen and unexplained. We were camping on a hill, our campfire burning steadily. Since the last light faded, the logs, warmed by the day's sun, caught fire easily, and our conversation drifted to the old ranger station's rumored haunting. That's when things got strange. The fire's shadows didn't behave normally. They stretched upward, climbing trees instead of sprawling across the ground. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. "Do you guys see that?" I asked. "The shadows are moving wrong." Jordan laughed nervously, dismissing it as a trick of firelight. Mark tossed another log onto the flames. Lisa leaned closer, watching intently, but something felt off. The air grew heavy, pressing down on us. The wind died, though distant trees still swayed slightly. An unnatural silence descended, making my skin crawl. Then we saw it. A pale, diffuse light drifting silently above the clearing, not a flashlight or lantern, but something else entirely. It moved with purpose, tracing the tree line just above the pine tops. The fire's shadows seemed to reach toward it, stretching impossibly high. We froze, transfixed. Mark leaned forward, hands gripping his knees. Jordan's jaw clenched. Lisa's eyes were wide and unblinking. The light glided smoothly, as if intimately familiar with the forest's landscape. No sound, no movement, just a presence that thickened the air and tightened our chests. I tried to rationalize it. A scientific expedition? Some experimental drone? But deep down we all knew this was something that defied easy explanation. The night was dark, and the fire crackled in the small forest clearing. Something didn't feel right. We were miles from the nearest road, and no one should have been in these woods at this hour. No traffic, no planes, nothing that could explain the light moving so slowly overhead. As the fire shifted and logs split, the shadows began to behave strangely. They didn't just sway, they seemed to rise, stretching upward toward the tree canopy as if pulled by the light above. A weird sense of vertigo hit me. The ground beneath the fire felt like it was tilting, even though the rest of the clearing remained perfectly level. The glow passed directly overhead, pale, silent, stretching across our small clearing before moving toward the distant ridge. It was barely brighter than moonlight, but it illuminated everything with an otherworldly quality. The branch edges, the needle tips, everything looked almost alien for a moment. Then, just like that, it vanished. No sound, no lingering light, no atmospheric change. Just normal darkness. The fire flickered as it always had. Shadows returned to the ground. A gentle breeze swept through, and the forest smelled exactly the same as when we'd arrived. We sat in silence, listening to the night's ordinary sounds. Crickets chirped, a distant stream bubbled, leaves rustled occasionally. Nothing moved. Nothing glowed. My tension slowly released, but I kept staring at the trees where the light had disappeared. "Okay. Oh, I guess that happened," Jordan finally said. Mark laughed nervously. Lisa shook her head. "That wasn't normal." We all nodded. We'd all seen it. We didn't discuss it much after that. We finished dinner, packed the firewood, and tried to act normal. Sleep didn't come easily. Every branch crack, every tree shadow made us jumpy. Morning revealed nothing unusual. The clearing looked ordinary. The fire pit was cold. Shadows were normal. No evidence remained of what we'd experienced. We packed up, hiked back to the trailhead, and drove toward town. Even now, I think about that light and how the shadows bent toward it. During daylight visits, the area looks like any other forest patch, but the memory of that pale, silent glow drifting over the trees remains vivid and unexplained. The night checks were winding down, and the yard lay quiet around me. Late October had draped a clear, cold blanket over the farm, with the sky spread wide open like a canvas. I was supposed to be inside, warm and settled, but walking the yard before bed was a habit I couldn't shake. The cows shifted quietly in the barn, chewing slow and steady. The big floodlight by the shop hummed its familiar tune. My old border collie, Hank, usually stayed close, but something was different this time. He stopped a full 10 feet from the silo, sitting hard with ears forward, eyes locked in place. No bark, just a rhythmic breath that sent a chill up my spine. I'd spent the day hauling bales and fixing a flat on the Ballor. Driving back, the truck radio had been giving off low static, but I didn't think much of it. Old wiring does that. I killed the engine, and the gravel crunched under my boots as silence settled in. Then the radio on the shop workbench caught my attention. It clicked and brightened with the same strange static, not the usual farm chatter, just a thin buzz like a distant mosquito. When I went to shut off the shop light, the bulb dimmed for a moment. Annoying, but I figured it was just a loose connection. The silo stood out there, a round metal cylinder that's weathered countless seasons, holding most of next string's feed. But something felt off. From the porch, the yard looked wrong in the floodlight. The metal roof of the silo was too bright, flashing in a way that didn't make sense against the dark sky. Even now, that moment stays with me. Sometimes at dusk, when shadows stretch and street lamps flicker, I remember. Part of me still expects that strange glow to drift through the trees, making everything feel just slightly out of place. The metal roof caught my eye with a strange rhythm. Not a camera flash, but a wet chrome glint like moonlight. It stopped abruptly. I thought maybe clouds had broken the moon's reflection, but the moon hung thin and pale behind wispy clouds that didn't typically make roofs wink in patterns. Hank followed me, staying respectfully distant. Up close, the roof looked ordinary, corrugated metal, weathered, with rust streaks near the screws. Standing with hands on my hips, I felt the roof pulse in sync with my own heartbeat. I searched for rational explanations. A distant farm light, maybe a hunter's spotlight, but the yard stretched long before any road, and our nearest neighbor was a mile away. The animals were the third strange thing. The cows in the next field had gone completely silent, unnervingly so. Usually you'd hear at least one shifting or sighing. That night, there were just dark shapes against the field. Even the barn cats had stopped their usual circling, perched motionless on the rafters like placed statues. I told myself animals do odd things when barometric pressure changes or tractors start unexpectedly. But the air felt like fragile glass, and everything seemed off-kilter. After watching the roof for about 5 minutes, I noticed a pale point of light high in the western sky. This wasn't a plane. No moving strobes, no consistent flight path. It pulsed in the same rhythm as the roof. A slight head movement confirmed my suspicion. The skylight and roof were perfectly synchronized. When the skylight brightened, the rooftop shimmered. When it dimmed, the roof followed suit. My first response was practical. Check the wiring. I walked the perimeter with my flashlight, tracing the feed line to the old electric post near the silo. The pole looked fine, insulators intact. No electrical arcing, no stray bulb I could find. Returning my gaze upward, the light continued its steady, heartbeat-like pulsing. Then another inexplicable event. My phone died. The screen went black, and when I powered it back on, it showed no service. I knew the yard's dead spots where trees block signals, but this felt different. My phone died for the first time ever. The dashboard clock reset and spun before returning to the correct time, as if nothing had happened. Something felt off. These little inconsistencies were piling up, weighing on me. I decided to climb the ladder against the local barn, thinking I might get a better view of what was happening with the roof. Hank stayed put, his eyes fixed on the sky. My boots creaked on the rungs as I climbed into an eerily still night, so quiet that a piece of hay might suspend in mid-air. From the top of the ladder, the pulsing became clearer. A light hung in the sky, about the size of my fist at arm's length. It was a soft, colorless pail that breathed in a slow, uneven rhythm. One long pulse, then one short, like sunspots expanding and contracting. The light brought a pressure change in my ears, similar to the sensation during airplane takeoff. A strange lightness settled behind my sternum, as if someone had opened a window inside me, and a breeze was tugging at my insides. I sat on the ladder rung to steady myself, briefly considering calling neighbor Ed, but my phone wouldn't connect. Ed's house was visible from my vantage point. His porch light was off, everything appearing normal. Then something unexpected happened with the roof's metal. The silo's circular seam, where the roof meets the cylinder, brightened in a reflected light that perfectly matched the sky's pulse. It was like an invisible hand had painted the rim and was tapping it in sync with the distant light. The metal didn't glow independently, but flashed in a steady rhythm. When the skylight held steady, the roof shimmered. When the skylight disappeared, the roof went dark. I climbed down and approached the silo's base, placing my hand on the cool metal. I expected heat or an electrical charge, but found nothing unusual. Just the night's cold, and a bit of grit. Running my gloved fingers along the seam, I found no scorch marks or damage. Everything was untouched. I called Hank, who rose, shook himself, and trotted over as if he'd been playing disinterested all along. The skylight remained for about 10 minutes. During this time, other small, strange occurrences happened. The barn's alarm clock jumped ahead a minute without ticking, then settled back. The tractor in the far field idled up, then settled back down for no apparent reason. A moth circled the floodlight, hovering mid-air like a suspended speck of dust. Something felt off, a mix of curiosity and uncertainty washing over me. I grabbed my flashlight, wondering if I could make the moth move or capture its strange stillness. Back at the truck, I found my camera. The battery showed 87% charge. I powered it on and took a shot toward the light, but the image came out as a grey smear, the sensor unable to focus. Later, reviewing the file on my computer revealed nothing but noise. Then, in an instant, everything changed. The sky pulsed, and suddenly the light vanished as if someone had snuffed out a lantern. The silo's shine disappeared simultaneously, and the air pressure normalized with a subtle pop. The radio in the shop hummed back to life, and the barn clock continued ticking, uninterrupted. Hank, my dog, barked once in surprise, then trotted in circles as if nothing had happened. The night resumed its usual rhythm, stars glimmering with their characteristic indifference. I walked up the gravel drive, deciding to keep the experience to myself. My wife would ask rational questions, and Ed from across the lane would likely claim he'd noticed nothing while splitting wood. Inside, I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table, elbows leaving stains on the wood. The kettle clicked, the radio played its evening call-in show, and I stared out the window at the silo. Under the moonlight, it looked completely ordinary, betraying no hint of the extraordinary event that had just unfolded. The next morning, I inspected the silo carefully. Climbing the ladder, I ran my hand along its surface, checking the ring girder bolts. Everything appeared exactly as it had the previous week. No burns, no pitting, no scorch marks. At the feed mill, the men joked about my story. Truck mirrors catch light, they said. Maybe stray highway lights. Their explanations sounded reasonable and filled the room with familiar comfort. They'd seen odd reflections before, and so had I, but these were just ordinary explanations. And something told me this was different. I'd take the last walk before bed, and there was Hank, sitting in the same spot watching the west. No howling, no barking, just staring like someone searching for something just beyond reach. I kept waiting for that light to return, caught between curiosity and a weird dread, but it never came back. From the road, the silo looked completely ordinary. Same rusty streaks, same dent on the south side. The farm world continued its steady rhythm, feeding animals, milking cows, fixing fences, the things that need doing, light or no light. I chalked the whole thing up as one of those unexplainable moments that collect over a long farming life. When I mentioned the pulsing light to Ed over the fence, he just nodded and quickly shifted our talk to corn prices. His casual chatter about the coming winter filled the silence. Even now, I still go out on clear nights to check the roof. Hank comes along, he enjoys the walk, and he's good company. Sometimes I'll look west, scanning where that strange light had been. The stars can be so crisp sometimes, like they've been cut with a precise ruler. Usually, though, it's just stars, exactly as they've always been. The roof catches moonlight in its usual way. I'll run my hand along the metal seam, feeling the cold and the grit. And that's the story I hold on to. The night something odd lit the silo's edge, and then just stopped. I apologize, but it seems the text you intended to share is missing from your message. Could you please resend the original text you would like me to rewrite?